So now you're rocking the three-piece and I'm not. All right, let's do this thing.
Sounds good.
Happy Tuesday. What are the odds? Makeup session, folks. Killer drum ending. All right, welcome to What Are the Odds? Barnes and Baris. Tuesday, makeup, because we can't miss a single week, apparently, here, Robert. It just gets crazier and crazier and stupider every single day. I would say every week, but it's worse than every week. I mean, we've been doing this for a while. This is the first thing I want to ask you, brother. Like, is this everyone's first election or something? You know what I mean? Like, that's all I want to ask you this, because you and I have been around a while, man. Why do these people every 4 years act like it's their first presidential election and they don't know what time it is?
I mean, it is quite extraordinary what people have forgotten. I even had somebody respond to, I posted a link to all of the current political betting picks we have up at sportspicks.locals.com. And somebody responded on X, remember Trump was, the polls predicted Trump was going to blow out Biden in 2020. You don't understand what's going on. And I'm like, did you completely miss the polling in 2020?
Where were you?
It's completely. I mean, the same in 2016. I mean, you came on my radar screen when I was doing betting research for 2016, because I had I remember talking to my brother around this time, August of 2016, and saying every single thing I'm looking at, and I traveled between the two conventions in Cleveland and Philly, tells me it's going to be that Trump should be the favorite, should be about a 2-1 favorite, except for the polls. So that's the only thing that's not. And I think something's wrong with these polls. And it was in the context of researching that I came across your research and work from 2014 that detailed all the polling misses all over the place in the Senate races that all went in the same direction.
Yep.
Overstated Democratic support again and again and again and again. And then, I'd studied polling in the past for political consulting purposes and for betting purposes, but I hadn't re-examined it in some years. So went back and took a deep dive and was struck by the what was happening, how it was happening. And my view is they still haven't fixed it. I mean, the other thing is what it shows, as we'll be discussing today, amongst other topics. Take a look at Nevada, take a look at Pennsylvania, look at some other metrics that I do utilize.
North Carolina.
North Carolina, Gallup party affiliation, voter registration trends. I wish they had the 7-Eleven coffee cup poll, because that was a lot of fun.
Oh,
that was like weirdly accurate in eclectic places. One of the top topics is, how Nate Silver and Nate Cohn are big fat fraud. Well, Nate Silver, fat fraud. Nate Cohn, skinny fraud. But they're both frauds. That's what they share in common. And it's because of what we've talked about here for weeks, response bias. And we'll get into some additional forms of bias that are likely to occur given the media coverage of Harris.
Yep.
That we saw glimpses
They do
of.
it. They do it, Robert. Yeah. They make it. This is what. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. I mean, we'll get into social response, social favoritism bias, um, other forms and methods of response bias, because there's data underneath the hood. The data is screaming. Multiple forms of bias are inflating Harris's numbers.
Yeah.
But to give an example, the YouGov, Nate Silver, Nate Cohn, all the major media pollsters have cited and referenced something that one of the guys that helped start Predict It, David Rothschild, wrote before he became an absolute political nut. Called the mythical swing voter. And
Yep.
you can, anybody can look this up online. the Quarterly Journal of Political Science, 2016, and this references what we've talked about, the RAND study from 2012 that Dorm Life did. And I'll just give you a few quotes. That we find that daily sample composition varied more in response to campaign events than did vote intentions. That's a fancy way of saying you just changed who you were polling. You didn't change people's opinions, nor did you capture a change in opinions. Vote swings in 2012 were mostly sample artifacts, and that real swings were actually quite small. And one more.
1 to 2 points for people who want to know the size of the swing that you will find. I have this great tool we developed. It allows us to go into the marketplace of all the people we have sampled. And I'll go to Lucid, who bought, it's bought by Sint, the one you and I work with quite a bit to pick juries and to develop juror profiles. They're the best. It's not an argument. YouGov sucks. By the way, YouGov is buying from us now, partly because they got too big for their own britches, so they can't afford. They don't have a panel big enough. So like they're going and asking us to supplement their panel. That's what's going on. So just so everybody knows that, we're real clear about that. All right. Ipsos sucks. It's one of the worst panels out there. Amerispeaks sucks. There are metrics you can use in these marketplaces to determine how good and how high quality the data is. You always hear both those Nates talk about high quality polls, low quality polls. Your data quality is low quality. I hate to tell you, and they know this. This is the thing, though. They know this, Robert. It's all a big charade. It's part of like the construct, who's credible, who's not credible, and it's all bullshit. But if we go back and we say, you know what? We just want to target people that we spoke to last month in last month's poll. You will not find a swing of more than 1 or 2 points. They don't move like that. People don't move. Their opinions don't change. And I'll shut up. Go ahead.
No, exactly. I mean, here's a few other quotes. It's, quote, hard to find voters who have actually switched sides in an election. Quote, be skeptical about the degree of volatility found in election polls.
That's true.
Quote, implausible that many voters will switch support from one party to the other because of campaign events. And last but not least, the apparent swings in vote intention represent mostly changes in sample composition, not changes in voter opinion. And these are phantom swings that arise from sample selection, bias, and survey participation.
Yes.
So this is just the basic description of response bias. And who has cited and quoted this? Nate Silver, Nate Cohn, YouGov. So, in fact, whenever Trump was doing better than expected, they immediately said it was response bias.
I'm so glad you brought that up because everybody was, dude, Nate Cohn just the last Maris poll that showed Donald Trump up over Biden and up over how it was the first time Trump has ever led in the Maris poll. And by the way, at that time, they already knew they were pushing out Biden for Harris. So they threw Harris's ass in there too. And she was also down. All right. Nate Cohn immediately ran out and said, let's not forget they changed their data collection mode. This could be a response bias or a design effect. Okay. Actually, here's the funny thing about that. Nate's methodology is more subject to response bias than the newer form of data collection that Maris, for some reason, decided to do in that one poll where Trump led. So don't, and that's a funny thing in and of itself. Like, why did Maris abandon their years-long methodology to get a poll to show that Trump is drumming Biden? They changed their methodology right before Democrats met to decide to get rid of him. Don't you find that funny at all, folks? Maris produced a poll that showed, and it was the headline, NPR, first time ever Trump leads the Democratic candidate. First time ever. All right. So this is amazing that they can fall back on it as a crutch when it suits when it suits the needs of their preferred party, but they cannot be consistent, Robert, and talk about this when it does not. So when it favors, when the data that they're collecting, because, and by the way, I can tell you right now, Nate's response bias is some of the worst I have seen in that round of polling he released over the weekend in the Rust Belt. That's actually worse than a lot of the stuff we saw in 2020. So Tony Fabrizio immediately went to task, Robert, and said, whoa, look at the recalled vote. And I immediately told people, look, recalled vote, meaning who did you vote for in 2020? That's the recalled vote. And if people have been watching me for a long time, they know. You want to know how small the true swing vote is? Look at the recalled vote and look at the people who said I voted for Biden, but now I'm voting for Trump. Look at the people who say I voted for Trump. Now I'm voting for Biden or Harris. By the way, that number is statistically insignificant for Trump. He is losing none of his base from 2020. Harris is losing about 6% of Biden voters. Biden was losing 10% of his voters. So she marginally improved with truly swing votes. That does not make a 6 or 8 point national swing, folks. That does not. It makes a 1-2 point swing into a tighter race that Trump is going to win anyway. That's what it looks like. Now, they're trying to create this environment, which is possible. It's a phenomena to make her to make her the favorite. I still think that's a heavy lift, but I will say this. When you have, and Tony Fabrizio immediately ran out and said, look at the recalled vote. It's way too low for Trump. It's not realistic. And when you were looking at it, it was like Trump only got 40% in Wisconsin. The FAU Main Street poll, that's a national poll that was released last week, Trump's recalled vote share was 36% nationally in a Harris +4, all right, or whatever. Folks, recalled vote share alone is not enough to say the poll is like just wildly inaccurate. But when you get a really different result like they got in the New York Times poll or the FAU poll, it tells you need to look at other things. And when you did, it was screaming shit data. All right. So Trump is not going to tie Kamala Harris with the white vote in the Midwest. If you think that, you're a fucking moron. All right. Pardon my French. Well, if you think that Trump's going to win non-college whites by 10, you're a fucking moron. All right. Like, I don't know how else to say this, Robert. Well, doesn't get old to you.
Part of the giveaways. In other words,
it's a giveaway. It's a red flag. Hello.
The way that response bias you can find in a poll are things like skewed party registration or voter identification, skewed vote recall from the last election, but also there'll be completely wacky underlying demographics.
Yes.
So, for example, like the black vote is what it is, right? And for the most part, isn't budging much. So there's going to be certain constituencies for which response bias won't show up.
That's right.
And in order to get the response bias, you'll get it. You'll see numbers that make no sense. So, for example, if you see no movement at all in, say, black voter preferences, but you see 20-point movement amongst white voters, okay, that's telling you something. Unless there's really some of it that's that racially polarized, that tells you, oh, I'm really just getting the white voters who like Harris answering the poll more than white voters who like Trump.
Yes.
Right. It's one of those. There's all these. And if you dig into all of these polls, they all scream response bias. They have these anomalies all over the place. Wild recall rates, demographics that make no sense, radical shifts in sectors that don't make any, that only happen in one part. So only one part of Pennsylvania moved and none of the rest did. It's like, okay, that should tell you your data's bad. So the other biases that we were going to cover that I think may be more of a pattern with Harris than with Biden is various forms
flag?
Of yeah, exactly.
Bullshit.
So I mean, and people are going to get a lot more of it. I mean, people have forgot.
Wait for Quinnipiac this week.
Biden led
Harris +10
by double digits in 2020.
Yes.
Hillary led Trump by double digits in
14
2016.
points. AP poll. 14 points.
Huge margins. Some of these state polls were off the charts. ABC +17 in
Biden,
Wisconsin.
Oh,
and another one that was +14 in Pennsylvania. So that's your, if you're on the Harris side, you would know what these polls have produced in the past. You're looking for double digit leads You're not looking for single digit leads because you know those numbers are fake. And as pointed out, like just looking at Ipsos,
Look at
Biden,
that.
if you had bet with Nate Silver, Nate Cohn, Ipsos,
Yeah.
Morning Consult, any of the university media polls, if you had taken their margin of victory as your odds that they predicted, pretty much anywhere in the country, you lost money in 2020, you lost money in 2016. So the people have forgot because Biden barely won it. It was as if, the polls must have been right.
Yeah.
They were still nowhere near right. They were predicting 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yes.
I made a bunch of money on 2020 despite the outcome because they were predicting Ohio was going to be close. It wasn't. They were predicting Iowa was going to be
Cohen
close.
had Biden ahead in Iowa and Ohio. 1 point. Biden +1. Biden plus Fox News. Biden +3 in Ohio. Do you remember that show? I remember it like it was yesterday.
You notice what else I don't see?
Poll in Ohio, and that poll dropped.
Absolutely. I mean, we were talking about very early on. So the Ohio and Iowa, North Carolina and Florida were outside the reach of the Democrats.
Yeah.
Remember, I don't see him doing what he did in 2020, which is in 2020, he would post like what you post, the different responses you got throughout the state.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that unless I'm missing it for 2024. And we made fun of him because there were examples of response bias problems, sampling problems, lack of representation is really the best way to think of it. That it's when the person you're talking to is not representative of the community that you're wanting, whose opinion you're projecting they represent. So remember what the Wayne County was going to vote for Biden by like 20 points. Remember that? That was their in-house Pennsylvania poll. Wayne County's part of coal country in the southeastern part of Pennsylvania. It's like an extension of West Virginia.
Beaver.
Yeah, that was good. And we said they found like the one university librarian. They found the one like Tim Walz type that lived there. And that's how they were projecting these ridiculous Democratic margins in places that weren't. That was the stuff New York Times predicted in Pennsylvania, Biden was going to win by 7 or more. And people are going nuts because they have Harris up by 3. That's 4 points worse, right? You got to compare base. The other thing is people are sometimes doing is comparing real clear politics averages to what's going on. I never do that because in different election cycles, they have different pollsters. I look at how did that pollster do in that state? How did New York Times polled extensively in 2020 with Siena College, organized by NACO.
Yes.
Morning Consult consistently throughout 2020. YouGov has been polling now back to 2016. Some of these you have a baseline of how they typically do, and they've been getting the states wrong for the Midwest now for years. On average, take
and
whatever
Florida.
poll is in the Midwest.
Florida. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Florida badly wrong. I mean,
Florida and the Midwest. That's
they thought Texas was going to be tight. Remember? I mean, they had Texas up 1 or 2.
Here it is. Got it right there. No, it's tied. Biden 48, Trump 48. And then, of course, the actual result was Trump by 6 points.
It wasn't even close. So I mean, I got on margin of victory. I got Trump +1, Trump +2, Trump +3, Trump +4, Trump +5. All were cash. And those were big underdogs. Trump +5 was a big underdog, 3-1 odds in the market.
Oh, yeah.
Because of those bad polls.
In Texas, you're talking about, right? Yeah.
In Texas. Iowa was the median margin of victory. Expected in Iowa, the margin of victory projected was 2.5, won by 8+. Ohio, 2.5, won by 8+. You made money at 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, you made money right up the ladder, as they call it in betting terms.
Here's what Robert's talking about with the responses, where they came from. I just wanted to show people that.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah.
He started basically stealing our idea back in 2018, and he has money, like the New York Times bankrolling him. So it was really cool. He was able to live poll and plot the way that we plot. By the way, we are the originators of the dial. The New York Times stole the dial. Do you remember that, Robert? We had a gauge that was spreadsheet. It was powered by a Google spreadsheet that was taking we would have complicated JavaScript formulas that were broken down into simple little formulas you can make with some of the functions on Google Sheets, and that would be checked by high charts in the gauge format every 30 seconds or something, or every 60 seconds. So it would update. It just would update very slow, and it would say likely Trump. But we did this back in 2016. He took that idea because it's a cool idea, and he made it live. He had a lot more money he could put behind it and developed it, and it was very cool. When he tried to do this, so people understand what Robert's talking about, in 18, he started, and I remember the first one that Robert and I looked at was in Florida, and he had Gillum up by like 8 points. And immediately it jumps right out at Robert and I that all of his independent voters are in the Gold Coast, are in Miami-Dade, or so like it's not just that he is having a response bias issue. It's not just his partisan, voters all over the place. It's that the independents he was talking to were educated independents in metro areas. Whereas, like, if you were to go around and look at Lee or Sumter or even the damn, the Panhandle, or Big Bend, Robert, there was like no independence out of Big Bend, or the Big Bend, or no independence out of Panhandle. And I immediately told him, and it was a public conversation on Twitter, like, you're going to be wrong, and here is why you're going to be wrong. Well, that happened. And then he stopped. And then in 2020, he did it again. Jim Lee from Susquehanna, Robert, myself, we're looking at like Pennsylvania, and we're like, you literally found the only librarian in Greene County who's going to vote for Joe Biden. Like, you got her on the phone during her lunch break. You caught her splashing the patchouli oil on her neck. All right. And she was super happy to take that poll with you when you called. Like, you literally don't realize what you're saying here. And Jim Lee is like, Trump won this county by 32 points, and the New York Times is Biden like going to win this county. It's just crazy, right? So, I mean, that is a response bias, and modes are more susceptible depending on the mode. So like live caller interviews are far more susceptible to response biases than other forms. Like even texting is definitely response bias. There's design effects that have problematic with online samples. So everything's got its challenges, but the media's favorite way, their so-called high quality way of polling, is the worst for response bias. And it's proven over and over and over again. And they only use it when it benefits them and their party. That's the only time they want to talk about it. Meanwhile, Robert, I get a Trump +7 nationally, and I tell everybody, this is bullshit. Republicans are super excited to talk. Is Trump ahead? Sure, he's ahead, but he's not winning the popular vote by 7. Like, I'm the only one who says things like that. Everybody else is like, like them. And it's just annoying after a while. But go ahead.
Yeah, for those asking what is response bias,
Yeah. Okay.
response bias, the first thing I ever learned about polling when I was a kid working the campaign, asked a university professor who was the pollster for the campaign.
Yeah.
I was like, explain polling to me. He goes, well, I'll tell you what a poll tells you. The first and foremost thing a poll tells you is who answered the poll. So response bias is when you don't get a representative sample. And what does that mean? It means the art and science of polling is trying to talk to 1,000 people or 2,000 people, or in some cases 500 people. And from that, projecting the opinions of 100 million. And that requires both science and art. And if you're not good at it, you're going to get an unrepresentative sample.
Yeah.
For example, the first example of real response bias in polling was the 1932 poll that was done. I forget, it was one of the big publications, sent out a postcard. And in 1928, it had been very predictive. In 1932, they predicted that Hoover was going to hold on. Yeah. And FDR wasn't going to lose. Needless to say, a little bit wrong. Why? Well, it was who they were polling. The people who were sent back the postcards ended up being overwhelmingly from a Hoover voting constituency, and thus were not representative. Gallup spent 40 years trying to master the art of getting representative sampling. I mean, he was the first one to say, well, we can't use postcards. We need to go door to door, and I'm going to hire door-to-door salesmen. Yeah. But even then, he was getting unrepresentative samples because it turns out your door-to-door salesmen were like, I'm not going into the West Virginia hills. No, thank you. I'll just report what I think they're going to say. but I ain't
And with
going up
exit
that.
pollsters, there's a similar problem still today with Edison Research exit pollsters, which is why they've tried to use our methodology, the AP Vocast. That is the 2016 poll Robert was telling you about that he stumbled upon that when he was researching that we were conducting. We were doing it based off of the idea that, Dorn's life, they were right. And that, that these swings are artifacts of the polls themselves. And, when you're hiring these exit pollsters, it's like a bunch of like graduate students who are running around in metro areas so they can fill their quotas super quick. And they're not talking to everyone everywhere, or they don't have to, but they're not even having a diverse enough group that they're speaking to so everybody's well represented. And did it's true response bias, just to answer that one question? Yes, it's a general term used. So Robert and I right now are really referring to the difference in people's participation rates. So depending on education, geography, those are two huge things. They're just more willing to take a poll 1 month. Like Mitt Romney never led Barack Obama. This is a great example. He never led Barack Obama. Pew Research, after the first debate, started making their calls, and Republicans were much more willing to talk because their guy had a great debate performance. Democrats wanted to hide under a rock because their guy blew the wad, man. He blew his wad in the equivalent of 5 seconds, all right, before like the lady was ever anywhere close to being done. All right, you get what I'm saying? So it was that bad. It's like that moment where you're like, ooh, and you want to like, it's cringe. It's such a cringe moment. The voter doesn't want to talk to you anymore. That person or those kinds of people don't want to speak to you. And there are different kinds. I found this little chart. It's a good chart. It's from Qualtrics. I don't personally work with Qualtrics, but they have some really cool tools. But there's 7 types of response biases. There are different, but social desirability is a huge one Robert and I have talked about over the years. That's number 2. There's a demand bias, dissent bias, acquiescence bias, extreme responses, personal biases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And just to give people an idea, like acquiescence bias is like the tendency for people to agree with everything the interviewer says. There are actually a lot of Republicans that have like fall to acquiesce bias. They're like, the interviewer can act a certain way. Like Richard Hart's interviewers are notoriously like pushy. Laura got one that would have caused a significant acquiesce bias. They call the house. She's Hispanic. They want to talk to her. She's younger. They want to talk to her. She's a female. They want to talk to her. Not me. I picked up the phone randomly. They actually asked for her. So I'm like, all right. Yeah, it's not how you conduct the poll, but whatever. I hand it to Laura. And the lady is Spanish speaking, like you could tell she has a Spanish accent, and she's trying to get Laura to agree with everything that she's saying. That is a textbook acquiesce bias. And so, who are you going to vote for? And Laura goes, Donald Trump. And she goes, that's textbook. That will cause that textbook. But yeah, go ahead, Robert. Go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
Yeah, well, exactly. And the biggest thing that happens with a response bias is at key moments in the campaign, there will be an enthusiasm gap in response to high-profile events. That will lead to Democrats being eager to participate in the polls, and or not eager. So we've had back-to-back response bias. In July, Democrats are depressed as all get out. Biden does a terrible in the debate. Trump survives an assassination, and the Republican convention goes on without a hitch. Those were all motivating, exciting events. So if you're a Trump voter and you see a text poll request, an online poll request, a phone call poll request, you're more eager to share your opinion.
Yep.
Whereas if you were a Democrat, you're in hiding. You don't want to talk to any pollsters. That starts to reshape the electorate, and particularly it happens amongst independents. So it won't show up often in party ID or party affiliation unless you dig deep. And so you get these results that, oh, wow, everybody loves Trump now and nobody likes Biden. And then when you get the reverse of that, Biden drops out for the sake of the country. Harris steps in. She's the hero. She's the combination of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, except she didn't have to go through a contested primary process. So she's got all the upside in terms of media coverage and none of the downside of a contested primary race. That they bombard you with it. And so what happens? Democrats are excited again. Democrats are enthused again, eager to answer the polls. Republicans are slightly, not as thrilled, not as ecstatic, not as excited. Also, they go on vacation in August disproportionately. And so you all you're pulling is, oh, here's the enthusiasm gap in response to recent events that doesn't translate to anything come election day. And
Yeah.
unless you filter that out, then you're going to get inaccurate polling. The other factor here is one of those response biases you mentioned that I think would
It's time.
I don't,
You're right.
I don't think it
I
existed with
got you.
Biden, but I think social favoritism. Can you
You're
explain
right.
to people what that is
Yeah.
and why it might be a factor with Harris?
Yeah. Yeah, so Robert texted me the other day, last week. We knows we're gearing up, getting ready to do another national poll, and he said, "Look, I think it's time for the neighbor voter, or like the." There are several. We do it differently. Some people, in order, there is an environment that's created. They're definitely going to do it with Harris, of course. Where if you don't vote for a black woman, if you're not, cool enough, or progressive enough, or hip enough, or smart enough, to understand that you have to vote for a black woman, then you are like socially unacceptable. So they will create this environment where people are afraid to share the views. And by the way, it was just on the wheel that I just showed you. That is technically a type of response bias, although like you should think of it more that it's a cognitive bias. And we call it social desirability bias. In 2020, and let me pull it up. Actually, I had it up here before. In 2020, you had people, actually, let's go back. In 2016, you had people who would ask things, and Robert from Trafalgar, Robert Cayley, he famously asked, "Who do you think your neighbors are voting for?" That was a way to elicit whether, or basically to draw out whether or not he believed these people were lying because of a social response bias, and there was a hidden Trump vote or a shy Trump vote. And lo and behold, there was. The answering to the question suggested there was. By the way, Gallup used to deal with social bias simply asking, who do you think is going to win? Now that question is a bit tainted. 2020 kind of proved it. It used to be more accurate than vote intention, but unfortunately, Democrats have created this kind of environment with the media where that question lost its predictive value in 2020, and I don't know that we can use it moving forward. But here's what we did: we developed something that's much, much different. Robert and I sat down. We're like, you know what? A lot of these people have good ideas, but there's got to be a better way to do this and to ferret out whether or not is there a social bias, and then if so, wouldn't it affect different people to various degrees? Like maybe someone has a feeling of a social bias like, impacting them, but maybe not enough that they're just going to lie. Maybe others will say they feel that and they're going to say they're undecided, so they're not really lying, but they're afraid to tell you their actual intention or their truth. Or and then there's more like an acquiescence bias where they just kind of like feel that pressure and they know what the right answer is. They know what the right answer. Let me put it in quotes. They know what the right answer is. They know the pollster wants them to say Kamala Harris. They know the pollster wants them to say Hillary Clinton, right? And on and on and on. And there could be this could happen not just with voting, but with what do you think about BLM? And you got these white people out there who are like, I hate those bastards. But they'll tell you, I have a somewhat favorable opinion of them. They're full of shit. All right. Virginia, I mean, we don't have to get into the governor's race. That was a social bias, a black candidate. He was ahead in the polls, but people were lying. Andrew Gillum, by the way, in Florida, we had these questions designed to like, I would say they weren't as sophisticated as they are now, but they were around in 18 where I was asking some along these lines, very clearly identified a group of people who felt like they had to say they were voting for Andrew Gillum, but they weren't. They were going to vote for Ron DeSantis. They were lying because they felt the social bias. So here's what we did. Here's the 2018 Public Polling Project. And we would ask people first and foremost, there's the horse race, those are the numbers, but the social desirability gauges we had, and we still have them, we still use them, and it's time to bring them back now. I believe it is. We would ask if there's a belief in a shy Trump vote. That's number one. Do you believe there is a significant number of shy voters who do not want to share that they are voting for Donald Trump? In the state of Arizona, 83.4%. In the state of Florida, 64%. In the state of Pennsylvania, 65.7%. In the state of Michigan, 67.3%. In Minnesota, 65%. And in Wisconsin, note that it's a little bit higher, 68.5%. So it's like, and then the disbelievers were people who flatly said, no, I don't believe that. I don't think that's the case. All right. And then we would cross tabulate these people with the answers to these questions and the answers to some of the questions we would ask on the poll. Like, are you undecided? Are you really undecided? Right. And we would simply ask, how comfortable or uncomfortable are you telling each group of, and there are these different groups, the truth about your political beliefs, such as how you intend to vote. And it's a scale, like a Likert scale, very comfortable, starting with very comfortable to very uncomfortable. So they're telling you during the interview, I'm uncomfortable with this question. All right. It was off the charts everywhere. You're not supposed to see numbers like this. It's time to bring it back to see, Robert, where we're at now, because I strongly suspect that they have created this environment. For a while, it was disappearing under Biden. That's why I got rid of it. That's why we kind of were like, all right, I think in 22, we got rid of it. It was like not really worth asking anymore. It was back down to normal numbers. Now, I guarantee you, if I would have stuck this in the poll last month, we would have seen incredibly, sharp increases in discomfort levels. And we'll find out. I mean, I'm going to throw it back in this next poll we got coming up, but which, by the way, you should support. It's in the link is in the description. I promised I'd poll in the rears, and I'm cool with that because, I know people will fund it, or at least I suspected they would. And we got through that project. It's done. The next farm is up. So share it far and wide, share it far and wide, share it far and wide. Because it would be great if we could poll bi-weekly, Robert, because these numbers are so much better when you get them more frequently. It's like you're not just dipping your toe in the pool to see, or you're not just jumping in. You're not just plunging and maybe you're shocked the water's hot or it's cold, right? So you're keeping your toe and dipping it in so you can take the temperature of the pool every so often. You're not going to be surprised by the temperature when you jump in. You know what I mean? So I like that. I think it's a better way to do it. But this is a little bit more of a sophisticated way. I think we did it better than others, to be able to tell. And the same groups, Robert, remember the same groups. And one of those groups who kept popping off every month, every survey, every time in every state, Black women below a certain age, Black men below a certain age. And as it turned out, he did better than the polls suggested he was going to do with both of these groups. Everyone talked about Black men. It was a question of how much better is he going to do. Nobody was talking about Black women except for you and I when we would look at these results and say, why is it so high with Black women? For those who don't know, Donald Trump doubled his support among Black women from 16 to 20. And it was not in the polls. In fact, in the New York Times poll by Nate Cohen, it was zero. The 2 to 4% that he would earn in the Black vote was all men. And that just didn't happen. That turned out not to be the case. Anytime you see a zero in a poll with Trump's Black support, it's trash. Wipe your ass with it and throw it down the toilet. It's trash. It's not even possible to have zero. And you see the Marquette poll? She had 100% of the Democratic vote. Robert, it's not even possible. Ladies and gentlemen, statistics don't work like that. They don't work like that. That's them. That's the pollster. I guarantee you they junked results they didn't like. They took interviews that they didn't like and removed them from the poll. That's the only way that happened. Only way. Zero. Okay.
Yeah, well, it's where you're seeing the underlying numbers. So while partisan response bias is the main factor we've been talking about for August, social desirability response bias is people knowing what they're supposed to say and not being, and that there's a percentage of the population that will not say what they truly think. I discovered this in person, even though I'd known about it from my political campaign days, into 2016. I mean, I decided I was going to not only go to the two conventions, but tour Eastern Ohio and Western and Southern Pennsylvania and Central Pennsylvania. Because I figured if I could figure out what's going on in these areas, I'm going to have a pretty good sense of what's happening in the election. Yeah. And tour, there's some cool, like, they still got drive-in movie theaters in rural Pennsylvania. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Little, you go to places that the coffee shop is still also the mechanic shop, the gas station, the grocery store, right? It's one of, the old school small town store. And everybody knows everybody when they walk in. You get a sense.
Hey, Bill.
Exactly.
Hey, John, how's it going today?
That small town community. But what I discovered was, and I think particularly because Hillary was the first woman president, they're putting that out already with Harris now again,
See the
Madam
cover of
President.
Time? They
I
junked
mean,
the assassination cover for Kamala Harris. I
well,
kid you not.
we
I'll
know
get it.
she quoted the Time article on her and said Madam President. I was like, how did that turn out for Hillary? Good luck with that. I mean, I was like, I don't know if I would tempt fate. But social response desirability bias is when you know the pollster wants a certain answer. And as
Yep.
Richard was explaining, this can be inflated and exaggerated with certain kinds of live modes of polling. Modes being how was the person polled? Because you can poll them by talking to them live. You can poll them by having an automated voice. You can poll them with a text, with an email, with an online panel. A live is even worse
Yes.
because they tend to have a strong response bias. And a lot of the people that are calling, that are in these call centers, they're not Trumpers. And so if there's a overlap of demographic between questioner and questioned, like say a black woman calling a black woman, as some of these call centers deliberately do in polling centers, you might really get, are they going to admit, I'm voting for the white guy instead of the black woman? So you're going to get certain pockets of
Her
people.
moment, Robert. It's her moment. You
Yeah,
see?
yeah, exactly.
Her
Exactly.
moment. Look at
It's
that.
so hagiographic. I mean,
Hey,
this is even
yeah.
worse, frankly,
It
than
is.
the Hillary or Obama
Or
cover.
Obama.
You know what I mean? Because there was, Obama had everything but a halo on his head. And
But part of
Hillary
Obama was real, at least. It was at
Hillary
least
was
like
the Joan
he
of
was
Arc.
he was authentic, though, at least, like whether
Yeah,
you
yeah.
liked him or
Oh,
not.
in
Like,
ways Harris is not. Well,
yeah,
plus he'd been
she's just a
tested.
total fiction. Everything about her is a total creation. Like, at least with Obama, like he could deliver on some of that. Let me just show people really quick. Here's after the Trump assassination. All right. To give an idea of response bias. Here's the after the Trump assassination attempt. As you could see, take note of the number of voters that we spoke with during this month. All right. And you can see, obviously, it's much more Republican. It's 3.3 points more Republican than normal. Okay. That tells you something. That tells you that Republicans were fired up, pissed off, and Democrats were hiding under a hole. They were like, oh my God, they tried to kill their guy. Like, so that's the way. I mean, that is how they hid. And then here is after Biden drops out and Kamala Harris is the presumptive nominee, and this is in the middle of glowing media coverage. Please note the number of voters. Okay, I'm saying that for a reason. The only difference here is that this happened to us. We reached different people. Those people, when you ask, who did you vote for in 2020? All right. And they tell you Joe Biden, and they're the same people have told you that in the past. When you find them again and you ask them, who are you voting for now? That spread is no different. In fact, it was only just under 2 points different in the New York Times poll that just came out. That tells you the rest of their swing is a response bias. It's not real. And I'm not saying the nature of the race hasn't changed somewhat, because I've seen black women, like certain groups, Robert, black women who are just kind of like checked out. They're more excited about Harris. They say they're going to vote for Harris. Groups like that came back. The white vote didn't get any more pro-Democratic candidate. The voter that is white that you're now speaking to is different than the group that you spoke to last month. That is textbook response bias. And how would you know? When you start calling areas like Polk or Rusk County, Wisconsin, and this guy is like your supposedly white rural voter, and he's telling you he's like a liberal with, like, I mean, look at the numbers. Like, there are things that will jump immediately out at you in that poll. By the way, in that very same poll, look at ideology. Where's ideology? Look at that. Look at how much more liberal and moderate it got. Really moderate. It's almost half moderate now. As people who follow our surveys know, that is not the case. It's usually like 36% conservative and it's like 40% moderate, ballpark around there. That's because it's a different group of voters this month. So nowhere in America is the rural vote shifting 10, 15 points to Kamala Harris. You're just speaking to different people. And by the way, Maris poll, also great example of that, Robert. In their shift to Harris +3, somehow they got Trump doing 10 points better in urban America, but or 6 points better in urban America than their prior poll, but he slipped over 10 points in rural America. Folks, that's not true. That's an artifact of the poll. That's not real. It's not real.
And if it was truly an enthusiasm gap in favor of Democrats, there are
I
a
have
couple
clip
of
on this.
places and major shift
Yeah.
in mindset amongst voters, like the media wants to spin. Now that Harris is here, this Obama-Hillary style hero from the dementia Joe, we can now rally to this extraordinary, unique candidate with Midwestern Tim, Teacher Tim, as the VP.
Tinker Tim.
Where you will see this represented, if it is true, is you'll see it represented two different dynamics. You'll see differences. You'll see sudden surges in people who just monitor and track party affiliation amongst independents and identification amongst independents in Gallup's data. But you'll see it in voter registration and primary turnout. You'll see surges of Democrats, people registering to vote as Democrats if there's true excitement on the ground.
Yep.
You'll see surges of Democratic participation in primaries that are taking place.
Yep.
And instead, if anybody follows the Florida Democratic Party accounts, they are in full-blown panic mode about the utter disaster of Democratic primary turnout in Florida.
Look at Miami-Dade. Look at Miami-Dade. There was just this shit poll out saying how, oh my God, Harris is ahead of Miami-Dade by this huge margin again, which of course is not true. This happened with Biden too. Remember, we had like shows dedicated to how Miami-Dade was swinging to Trump in our polling and our research to it. We conducted research and everybody else telling us.
I initially didn't even believe it because I mean your data was showing a 20-point movement in Miami-Dade. And I was like, holy cow, but that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, because they never saw those Venezuelans coming. Remember, because there were things I would tell you, Robert, that I didn't say publicly because I didn't want anyone to catch on. Like, I remember Nate Cohn, like, waiting for what he thought was a problem. So he saw Trump's approval rating very strong in Miami-Dade. So he's like waiting up for education, thinking that like he screwed up and he spoke to the wrong people in Miami-Dade. So, and I'm like showing Robert the voter file, like, Robert, look at all these Venezuelans. Now look at how they're telling us they're voting. Bro, there's like 50,000 added to the rolls in the last however many months. It was a huge number. And I'm like, he's going to add 200,000 votes to his total statewide from South Florida. This is going to happen. And I got mocked. I got ridiculed. I got called names. And that pollster was telling everybody not only was Biden up by huge numbers in Miami-Dade, but Biden was going to win Pinellas County by 19 points. Do you remember that? You remember? That is that pollster. That's him. So I dare Democrats to put millions of dollars into Florida thinking that's real. I personally think they should. Right? Prove the People's Pundit wrong and go spend a fortune in Miami to win Miami-Dade. Knock yourselves out. And here's the great thing, actually. We're talking about this. I probably should have played it before, but here's Harry Enton on CNN. And then I want to actually tell people about those early voting numbers you were just talking about, because Democrats, they are in panic. They're supposed to be ahead in these polls. They're supposed to be leading in Miami-Dade. Republicans have outvoted Democrats overwhelmingly. So and this is not normal when you compare it to even 2020 as recent, when Trump did very well in Miami-Dade. He only lost it by 6 points. When he did very well, Democrats had still ran out of there with like a 16-point advantage with early voting before that was over. It's not the case. It's now like R+4. So this is a major problem for Democrats, because where are they going to get those votes from, folks, if they're not early voting, right? So that's why they're thinking this is all messed up. But here's Enton talking about, not in as much detail as us, but talking about here's what will happen if the polls are wrong again, the way they've been wrong in the past. All right. Because he's trying to tell everybody on CNN, listen, I think I may have made you a little too excited. All right. And he's trying to right. This is what he's doing. He's like, I think I may have sowed complacency or something. Let me try to walk it back and bring people back down to planet Earth. Here it is.
step back and sort of point out we've kind of been here before. So August 13th, how far were the polls off in Michigan, Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin? And this is in 2016 and 2020. Trump was estimated both times around and by significant margins. Take a look here. In 2016, the average poll in those states that I mentioned, those Great Lake battleground states, Trump was underestimated by 9 points on average at this point in 2016. How about 2020? It wasn't a one-off. Look at this. He was underestimated by 5 points on average. And of course.
But wait, I just want to point out, he's talking about right now, August 13th, today. All right, because actually in 2020, it will get worse for Trump as we get closer to the election. It doesn't get better. It gets worse. And the polls wind up underestimating him by an even larger margin than they underestimated him against Hillary Clinton.
Kamala Harris's advantage in those New York Times Siena College polls were 4 points in each of these key battleground states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. The bottom line is this. If you have any idea, if you're a Kamala Harris fan and you want to rip open the champagne bottle, pop that cork, do not do it. Donald Trump is very much in this race. If we have a polling shift like we've seen in prior years from now until the final result, Donald Trump would actually win. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I am saying that he is very much in this ballgame based upon where he is right now and compare that to where he was in prior years.
Oh, I got more. And she goes on to have a panic attack, and she's like, oh, there's 3 months. And he's like, right. But in the past, that's worked against you. He's trying to tell, well, we still have a long way to go. We have 3 months. And he's like, yeah, but in 20, it gets actually better for Biden. And then those polls are off by an even bigger margin. So we actually did think that 2020 was going to be the bigger polling miss than 2016. And one of the things that made me so confident about that, Robert, were those social bias indicators we put together. So we really need to field those bias indicators and find out what's going on, because if they start triggering signals left and right like they did last time, we have a problem.
Well, what they're saying is if you're not voting for Kamala, you're not a good Democrat. If you're not voting for Kamala, you are misogynist or don't want women to ever succeed.
Yep.
And if you're not voting for Kamala, you're racist. All three. And that's going to impact some voters. And all it's got to do is impact a small portion of them. To give an example, when I was traveling through those states, I would talk to people to try to get a sense of, what they thought about the election and so forth. And it was a particular group of working class women who did not want to answer honestly what they thought about the election.
Yes.
Their husbands were happy to tell me. That's what I realized. Working class, old school Democratic country was on the working class white men was going to be massively for Trump because they were eager to tell me. But their wives, not so much. And I started realizing I could ask a question. I would say, I think a lot of people are just going to go into the voting booth and that's where they'll decide what to do. And right away, the reluctant, shy voting wives yes. I think that's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah. You're exactly right about that.
And it's like, that's never how anybody votes. But that's the person telling me how they're going to vote. But they don't want to be out there saying, I'm for Donald Trump against the woman. They think that's not the proper thing to say to some stranger. So that's where I think that their media is going so berserk. I mean, they really are. This is their ultimate test. Can we elect an unelectable person in ridiculous conditions and circumstances in terms of the economy, immigration, and war, just with our media manipulation? That's why they're so berserk about Elon Musk allowing for an independent platform to challenge it.
Flipped out. They're suing him now. Him and Trump. They sued him over. And you're the lawyer. I would love to get. What's wrong? We're gonna get that in a second. Hold on. Sorry. I have another clip. Catching Tim Walz stealing valor, but let me read you this, and I want to get your take on this. This is definitely your expertise here, not mine. The UAW, the United Auto Workers, has initiated federal labor charges against Donald Trump and Elon Musk, alleging that during a public this conversation on Musk's platform, the two advocated for the illegal firing of workers on strike. This action is seen as an attempt to intimidate and threaten workers workers violating their rights under the National Labor Relations Act to engage in protected activities such as strikes. The charges stem from remarks made by Trump and Musk, which the UAW perceives as threatening, highlighting a significant conflict between high-profile figures and labor rights protections. What do you think about that? And just for people who are asking, that is the mythical swing voter. I will put the link in the description for you guys so you can see it and read the research. It's outstanding, and it's not alone. I mean, what Robert's bringing up before, those quotes are from various different sources. There really is no swing voter. The swing voter is a tiny, tiny, tiny share of the electorate, and they do not swing public opinion by 10 points in a week. It's not big enough. It's not real. Those are artifacts of the pulpit. What do you think about this ridiculous claim by the UAW?
Yeah, the problem is you can, as you know, seek two issues. The National Labor Relations Board, in my opinion, is going way beyond its permitted scope, and they're doing this. They did this in COVID context cases.
Yeah,
They're doing it in other cases where they're asserting their authority over all employer-employee relationships everywhere, regardless of the size of the employer, regardless of its relationship to union activity. And so I think that's problematic on its own terms. That's why the UAW is doing this. Now, the second issue is constitutionally, the limit of the labor laws is it has to be specifically tied to a specific employer situation. Otherwise, you can't just, otherwise, you're trying to use the labor laws to take away First Amendment rights. And if they're right, they could stop any member of Congress, governor, state representative, anybody anywhere from second guessing labor union activities and labor laws. And so that they're wrong. If it gets to a court, they will lose. Now, Biden has a fix on the National Labor Relations Board, so that's what this is about. But as a tangential component, this is dumb on the UAW's part. The UAW knows most of its members are voting Trump.
Yep.
UAW the UAW leadership is a joke. It is an embarrassment. I say this as somebody who interned for the AFL-CIO as a kid.
Well, all you have to do is look at their social media pages. Every time they go on a Trump tangent, their members trash them in the comments. Trash them.
They got a bunch of commies running the UAW.
Yep.
They got a bunch of professional managerial class people that have never worked a day in their lives, that are your Tim Walz types. If you want to look at Tim Walz and Kamala Harris, at their experience in the private sector, it doesn't exist. Neither one has any experience in the private sector. They've never been in the private sector. They have no idea. They're professional politicians. That's the kind of people who run unions today. And I understand if you're the government workers union. I understand if you're the teachers union.
Yeah.
There you're being representative of your commie instincts of your brethren.
Yeah,
but that is not true of UAW. The UAW was a great union in America once upon a time. It has become a complete joke. The Democratic Party smacks them around whenever they want. They dog walks them whenever they want. They betray the UAW in NAFTA. They betrayed the UAW in China and WTO. And all the leaders of the UAW have done is betray their workers on a daily basis, pushing woke nonsense that their union members don't care about. And they're a disgrace. There's no better example of the corrupt. I mean, you can have all the criticisms you want of Papa Hoffa, but Papa Hoffa actually fought for his members. He might have had some friends along the way to help with those members, but it did help his members. He had the best pension program in the country. Now, it helped that he was investing in some interesting enterprises, but it didn't. The difference was he actually cared about his members. He actually advanced the interest of his members. Corruption, true corruption, is what the UAW is today. The UAW is run by woke hacks who despise their own members. They dislike them. They have a distaste for them. They disrespect them, and they disregard them, and they refuse to represent them. And it's why nobody in the political world takes the UAW seriously, because they're a joke. Their leadership is a joke, and more people should call them out on the Democratic side and elsewhere, because they're an ongoing, walking, talking embarrassment to true labor activism and true workers' rights in this country.
Amen, bro. Amen. As we were talking, They're not a great poll, but Data for Progress released a swing state poll. It is in, I'm just going to read this to people just to give them we'll brush over it. Again, another seriously flawed poll, but it actually is a bad poll for Kamala. But let me tell you why it's flawed in a second. It is Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and they have the two tied at 49. And this is unbelievable to me. Trump is winning the white vote by 16 points. He has 30% of the Latino vote, which could make sense to me in some of those states, but not all of them. 20% almost of the black vote. And for some way, I don't know, they're tied with voters who have over 50,000 income, and Kamala only has a 1-point lead with those who have the lowest income tier. If she's only leading with those who make 30,000 or below, she's cooked. I mean, this is such a scammed poll. It's not even funny. Where did they go wrong here? All their independent and third party, if you look at it, is super liberal, and she only leads by 2 with them. So why is it super liberal? Because Robert and we were talking about how response biases impact partisans. But the truth is, most people who say they're independent aren't really independent. They lean one way or the other, which is why we have an independent affiliation gauge. And when you say, do you share more in common with the Republican Party, the Democratic Party? Do you share little in common with either party? Or do you basically have a little bit more, common with both? Are you equal? And those who say they share little in common with either are true independents. Trump wins them. But when you have these response biases, you'll notice that people who say they have more in common with Democrats will bloat up that sample. They'll become too much of that sample.
Well, that's a good transition into what is the Gallup party affiliation data?
Yeah, let me
tell us about what's coming in 2024.
Yeah,
because this is
how they do that, by the way. Very interesting.
Because what I've been most interested is not people identifying as Republican, not people identifying as Democrat. It's rather amongst independents.
Yeah.
Which party are they identifying more with
Here we
these
go.
days?
Let me pull this up.
Because the trends you get there generally are accurate at forecasting the upcoming elections.
Yeah.
And you go back over time, what's amazing about this data is it's mostly been static. So amongst independents, it's usually been a Democratic lean group.
Yep.
But when you get to the signs that the Republican Party floor was going to fall in back in 08, started in 06 and in late 05, and it showed up amongst independent voters, party affiliation. And what was happening is independent voters were increasingly saying they identified more with the Democratic Party than the Republican Party by double digits.
Look at that, 50 to 39 in April of 2006. We could fast forward more, but that's when the bottom really starts to fall out on. Look at this, 54 to 40 the next month, 55 to 38 by June, by the summer of that year. Oh my God, that's so ugly for Republicans. Oh,
it was, and that was a sign that trouble was coming in 06 and 08.
Yeah.
Now you flash forward, you saw little movements in 2010 that showed Republicans could make a comeback, came back to even in 2012. What's been interesting is this number has been pretty stagnant, pretty close back and forth. There's always variability between polls, but if you start to aggregate the average of those polls, it's been a Democratic edge, at least at some slight level in more polls than not. But that has started to change since the summer of last year.
Yep, let's go there.
And what you're seeing is the biggest trend amongst independents, saying the Republicans are seeing the most consistent edge in identification amongst independents, leaning Republican, than they have had in a very, very long time.
Yeah. And
it's a significant movement. It's a movement we didn't see in 2016 at this scale. We didn't see in 2020 at this scale. We are seeing it in the build up to 2024. So what this tells you is this is another sign that Democrats are in serious trouble in 2024, because your independent voters sitting there saying, who do I identify more with? And for the first time in decades, they're saying, I identify more with the Republican Party. There's more Gallup polls over the last year that have independents leaning Republican than Democrat than they have ever had over any annual 1 year basis.
It's now Republican plus 6, 47 to 41. That's what it started to look like before Obama. That last one, when Obama won, did end up Democrat plus 11. But the month before, it was Democrat plus 7. So very much like it's where it was right now. And in the summer, leading up to in July of 2008, it was about where it is now. Democrats were 1 point higher. Republicans were 1 point less. So, but I mean, really close. I just downloaded that data, Robert, because I'd like to actually plot that data on like a line chart. That'd be really cool to follow. Yeah. I mean, so it tells you, and this is what I like about how they do this with Gallup. Gallup's like us. They don't believe in waiting for party. If everything else, if you have a massive sample, which Gallup does for this massive sample, it's part of a larger poll project that they do. And you make sure that your core demographic groups are well represented. That will tell you what the electorate is going to be by party, right? So I just don't agree with waiting for party. I know there are those who do, but if you do wait for party, you're waiting to what? Like last cycle? I mean, like things never stayed the same. As Robert was just rattling off all of those years and all of that time. The electorate changes and partisan ID changes because of how these like true independents move. And by the way, Robert, you still see, what are we looking at? 30%, 30 something percent, right? 32%. And we're talking about a percentage of about a third. So when we say that even big changes among a subgroup like that still would not result in a national poll swing or a state poll swing that you're seeing right now. That's not, we're talking about, it would be a few points here and there. That's how elections are decided in this country.
And to distill it, I think for the first time in the modern era, the national electorate, in terms of where they lean, is going to be at least even. Democrats have had a 3, 4, 5 point edge, up to 7 or 8. You go back to 2008, in terms of if you included the leaned groups. I think now you're gonna end up with something pretty darn close to dead even nationwide, and a Republican leaning electorate in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona. And this is a good transition into voter registration statistics.
I was just going to say,
let's take a look at Nevada. So if you go to the voter registration statistics in Nevada, each year they report who's voting early, and there's all these people that track it and trace it. There's some fake journalists out there who pretend to be polling analysts who I've got into debates. I think he's currently blocked me, so I don't get to have any more fun picking at him, because all these people, by the way, I've challenged Nate Silver to bets since 2016. He's refused to take a single bet. I've challenged Nate Cohn to a bet. He's refused to take a single bet. It's like, just put a little money where your mouth is, or at least put your reputation where your mouth is.
Yeah.
Let's see who's right. All these guys too scared. Same with Dimwit there in Nevada. So, but in Nevada, generally speaking, Democrats' entire margin of victory in the Trump era, 2016 and 2020. Their margin of victory has come from Democrats outvoting Republicans as a percentage of the electorate.
Yep.
Because they constantly lose the independents. The independents and unaffiliated on election day end up breaking Republican. The only question is how big they break Republican. But, so for Democrats, for example, in Nevada, they win by 30, 40,000 votes, 25, 30,000 votes, somewhere in that neighborhood, 2016, 2020. But Democrats outvoted Republicans in each of those elections by more than the margin of victory. So what does that mean? It means Democrats need a cushion of a turnout edge in order to win Nevada. Well, what registration active voter edge did they have in 2016 that could produce a 25, 30,000 vote edge on election day? Over 100,000.
Yeah.
Democrats had 100,000 plus active voter registered voter edge in the summer of 2016 that produced only about a 30,000 vote edge on election day. 2020, still at about 100,000 registered voter edge.
90,000 plus.
90,000 plus.
Right now. Yep.
And that produced about a 25,000 vote edge on election day, and they barely won. It was less than the margin. Now, if you go to 2024,
it's on the screen, folks. Look at it right now. This is most current right now. I know it's hard to look at. I'll read it to people, Robert. It's small.
Yeah.
They have less than a 30,000 vote advantage now. It is 1/3 of the advantage they had just 4 years ago. Just 4 years. And by the way, less than a third of what they had when Hillary barely held on in 2016.
Exactly. So what you have is, be looking at past data. What is likely to happen on election day is Republicans are likely to outvote Democrats in Nevada for the first time in a long time, in at least 20 years, because in this active voter file is a lot of very low propensity Democratic voters.
Yes.
And even with mass mail-in voting, there was still a 60,000 vote drop between their active voter registration edge and their actual turnout edge. So if they get anywhere near that again, it means Republicans are going to have a 30 to 40,000 vote edge on election day. And you add to the independent vote that's likely going to vote Republican again, because it hasn't in the last two presidential cycles for Trump, the unaffiliated, the small parties. And some of these small parties are very conservative when you dig in. If you add in the small conservative parties,
the
right now has a voter registration edge in Nevada.
The American Independent Party's got almost 90,000 votes. That's three times the margin that Democrats have. So
that's the first time ever that they have never outvoted at this time of year, post primaries, summer before the presidential election, looking at like data to like data from the same source. That's never happened. So basically, Democrats are going in that unless they get a miraculous edge amongst independents, they're going to lose the state of Nevada by 30 to 40,000 votes, just based on this voter registration trip. And what is that? That's a 2-3 point loss. That's outside the margin of fraud kind of loss.
Look at how much
losing Nevada. How are you winning Arizona?
Look at how, because that's next. We should do that next. But look at, I just showed you guys the most active numbers for the most recent update. Ours will update, our voter file will update in 2 days. All right. In the state of Nevada. All right. This is the month before I just ran it right now. So here it is on the screen. Democrats, 608,189 or 30.6% of the total registered vote. And Republicans were just about 567,000 or about 29%. They have now jumped to 579,313, while Democrats have 200 voters, bro. They went from 608,189 to 608,332. That's it, Robert. That's it.
These are younger voters, by the way, who register late, who are added to the active voter polls. People going to UNLV and Reno, but community college, but it's young people who come to Vegas hoping to hit the jackpot. It's the reason why Kamala Harris had to steal the no tax on tips is because the culinary union wouldn't endorse her out here in Vegas unless she did, because in Vegas is a huge tipping town. That if you make the mistake of not tipping big after you win at the table, you will be hated and bad things will likely happen to you before you leave town. Maybe not Joe Biden's sudden medical emergency you have to hide for 3 weeks kind of problems.
That happened.
But here in Vegas, what happens in Vegas sometimes does stay in Vegas. These voter registration numbers for anybody who's followed Nevada for the last 10 years. Now, here in Nevada, they like to pronounce it like they're a sheep or a lamb.
Nevada.
That still annoys me. So I like Nevada. That's more, more zeitgeist behind it, more juice. But basically, this shows you by the voter registration, which has been very predictive in Nevada, going on a decade, as even John Ralston and the lefties have admitted.
The Watch still changed their tune on this now, because for years it was favoring Democrats, and then in the Trump era it started to reverse. He even tried to explain. Well, he was honest in 20 and said that yes, it has closed, but that he believed Democrats still had such a massive edge in Clark that they would be able to hold on. And in fact, they held on by 30,000 votes or something like that, right? And so that's it.
Clark County, where they've had a complete collapse of the Democratic voter edge.
Yep.
They've had a 50,000 vote decline in party registration edge in Clark County.
Yeah.
Let's look at that. I can tell you it's two groups. It's Latinos and Asian. Why is it 3? Latinos, Filipinos, and because there's a decent Filipino population here, along with Hawaiians and some other Asians that have always been tough to poll in Nevada. That's why the polls have been one of the only place that's skewed Republican in some areas, in some pollsters over the last decade and a half. And young service workers. That's the 3 group. Now, what it is, those groups overrepresented in Nevada. And so the fact that these people are choosing Republican registrations every single week here throughout the summer at a rate that has never happened in the history of the state is a screaming signal as to what's going to happen.
In Clark County, Republicans from 2020 are up about 10,000 registrations. Democrats are down. I can't be reading this right. I am reading this right. They're down from 532,407 to 473,682. Wow, dude. That's twice their statewide margin. Does anybody understand that? That is twice. They have lost registrations. They have lost so many registrations in Clark County alone. It is twice the statewide margin. So how's John Ralston going to explain this now, Robert? Because in our polling that had Laxalt up by less than 2, it was like 1.8. It wasn't a final poll, so everybody can kiss my ass pointing to that. He's still, though, it's like you could see his loss was actually baked in the cake because Washoe County, he was down to, and we actually underrepresented his vote there, but he still lost Washoe County. Trump was up by 8 in Washoe when Laxalt was down. Get this, or no, up by 4 when Laxalt was down by 8. So 12-point difference in performance between Laxalt and Trump. In Clark, Laxalt was down by 5, which is about what he lost Clark County by. We nailed that. But Trump was up by 3. So 8-point difference in Clark in performance, 12-point difference in Washoe. I mean, the 2 largest, most populous counties in the state. And now we see Democrats collapsing 60,000 registrations in the county that is 70% of the vote statewide, and the county that Democrats constantly rely on that last, like, it's funny, guys, because how much is that last absentee ballot dump that puts them over? It's usually around 30 to 50,000. It's usually that last chunk. They don't have it anymore, is my point. They don't have it. And they're already winning that vote by an unrealistic margin. Are you telling me they're somehow going to win it this time, Robert, by like 95-5 instead of 90-10? Like, kiss my ass. Like, that's not believable. And even, but it wouldn't matter. It still wouldn't be enough, is my point. It still wouldn't be enough.
The problem is they don't have the votes to harvest.
They don't have the
votes
votes to harvest.
Yeah, and that's the problem. 2020 was their perfect environment to maximize turnout.
Yeah,
and they still had a 2/3 drop off in their registered voter, active voter edge and turnout.
Look at this. Unbelievable.
And that basically Republicans and independents who lean Republican are going to outvote Democrats for the first time in the modern history of this state. And that should tell you something more broader, because it's the constituencies driving it. Now, Trump is always going to do better in Nevada than other places because it has an underrepresentation of the professional managerial class.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of people with masters and post-college degrees here. There's a huge working class vote. Second, the ethnic groups that exist here are the ones he's been trending so positively amongst, which are Mexican Americans, younger service employees without college degrees, and particularly Zoomers and younger millennials. And then where he's trending positively, people aren't paying attention to. I have friends here in Vegas or in the Filipino community, and these, by the way, come from people who went to Harris's rally. All right, people pro Harris said every single one of their Filipino friends is voting for Trump. They're like, there's no way Harris can win I was like, well, if she can't win the Filipino vote, she's DOA, because that's a vote that was almost 20, 30 points Democrat last 2 presidential election cycles here. So when your vote margin is so small to begin with, the reason why Republicans now are having a voter turnout edge on election day is because those young Asian and younger African American men and Mexican American men,
Hispanic,
disproportionately trending Trump's direction, and even amongst some pockets of potential support, like Mexican American younger women, that's the number one group that doesn't do well, that democratically leans, that doesn't like Harris. Something about Harris, they're like, no, thank you.
Dude,
No, gracias. And they might park their
no,
vote.
gracias.
They might park their vote with, one way I think you'll be able to measure social response bias. Some of these people will park their vote with Kennedy.
Yeah.
Whether they plan on voting for
Or
him or
none
not.
of these candidates.
Right.
None of these
candidates are small third party, just because they really don't. They don't want to say they're voting for Trump, but they don't want to say, but they know they don't want to vote for Kamala Harris.
Now he is seriously on the ballot in Nevada. That is one that's confirmed. That's done.
Oh yeah.
Right?
I mean, they're going to try these other things, but what happened in New York is highly likely to be overturned either by the federal courts or the higher state courts.
Bro, like Democrats have you're telling me they believe she's this far ahead that they have sued and spent money on litigation to get Kennedy off the ballot.
They spent over $10 million trying to keep. They've sued Kennedy in literally every single state. Here in Nevada, he got on the ballot, and then they petitioned the Secretary of State and got him off the ballot. So he had to get back on the ballot. He had to do a second cycle of petitions.
I hate this ballot access issue in this country, Robert. You and I have been talking about this for
I've been
years,
fighting it constitutionally for 25 years.
Yeah.
We, the voters, should decide who's on the ballot, not the politicians. And all you should do is be able to pay a small fee, $500 fee, like used to be the case. In Tennessee, all you do is pay a small fee. Some of these states, you just pay a small fee. There's never been a flood of too many candidates on the ballot. And can you imagine a legal system that says we have to make sure there aren't too many options for voters? It's ludicrous. It's unconstitutional. It's always been unconstitutional.
Democracy.
The mistake some of the Democratic lawfare is doing is they're going to put maximum pressure on higher courts to make better law because the courts are sensitive to showing how much they manipulate elections through ballot access being publicly disclosed. So they get away with it when it's some marginal person. But if it's George Wallace in 1968, Supreme Court gets involved. If it's John Anderson in 1980, Supreme Court gets involved. They didn't even try to keep Perot off the ballot.
Yeah, they didn't even. They didn't. They were too.
They knew they would get hammered. Yeah. So watch the Kennedy make some good law because the courts don't want the world to know that America manipulates its ballots more than Iran and Russia. Iran and Russia will have more candidates for the president on their ballots than most Americans will, which is an embarrassment to the American legal system. I'll be right back.
I've always hated, and I'll keep this. I'm just going to show people Arizona while Robert's gone. I've always been, I cannot stand. I understand, filling up a ballot. I get that. I can see like some of the challenges it might pose to states, but Robert's right. There's never actually been in states where it was easy. And for many years in a lot of these southern states, which are supposed to be the Jim Crow states, it actually was simple to get on the ballot. There was never this like ridiculous flood that they're always worried about. It just didn't happen. But I can understand even a certain level of, you have to show us that you have support with some of these signatures. You just make sure you crack down on the business of signature gathering. I mean, and it shouldn't be that much. It should be a system that doesn't push people to go hire a phony because there are firms that do this, folks. The campaigns will hire these firms to get, these signatures. Sometimes they do it legitimately. Sometimes they don't. And it becomes this business that courts have to scrutinize, and it's ridiculous. But, this is, again, the party who lectures us all about democracy is trying to jail, imprison, and persecute their political opponents. They're trying to keep people off the ballot. They are not believing in primary elections anymore. They just select a candidate like Joe. I find it sad that the Democratic voter is a hive mind voter. They chose Joe Biden and they're just taking it, like bending over like Bernie. Bend over Bernie. Not like him, who just bend over and take what they're told. I mean, it's outrageous. I was just looking at the voter file. Robert's back. Robert, I was just looking at the voter file too, a little bit deeper before I got in Arizona, in Nevada, when I was like lamenting over this ballot access issue, which pisses me off and has pissed me off since I was like 17 years old in this country. I've always hated it. That was Ralph Nader back then. Do you remember that? You helped Ralph Nader, didn't you?
Oh yeah.
You did help Ralph Nader that year.
Well, Democrats and Republicans conspired to keep Ralph off the ballot. Like some of the chat asked about butterfly ballots. That's a design of a ballot. I mean, the issue wasn't people were confused about who to vote for. They designed a ballot like they used to do in my old neck of the woods in Grundy County. I once asked them how they got to 99% in some of these local elections. And the local old school guy, it's an old coal mining county, voted socialist in 1912. Huge Trump county today, of course.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, you just got to make sure the ballot's done in such a way that they think they're voting for one person, but it gets counted the other way. And they had figured it out. So the butterfly ballot was a design issue. It wasn't too many candidates. People were like, golly gee, there's 5 candidates.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, I can't decide anymore. No, it was because they designed a ballot that nobody could figure out where you're supposed to vote for the person. So totally different issue. Because what the trend we see in Nevada, you see across the country, to give people an idea, there has been a 10-to-1 shift amongst new registrant trends towards Republicans over the last year, pretty much across the country in terms of net gain.
Looking at Maricopa now, it's
huge
similar.
in places like Florida and other, but it's massive in Pennsylvania, where the registration just keeps flooding in the Republican direction, thanks to the efforts of people like Scott Pressler and others. But a state that is a lot like Nevada in terms of its key demographics that are going to decide the election: Hispanic voters, younger voters, not as many Filipino or Asian voters, a little more, well, not a little more, but similar Mormon, small Mormon constituency and the like, but similar amongst younger Mexican-American voters and a decent number of service employees that are younger millennials and Zoomers. There's like Harris suddenly embracing a Trump proposal like no tax on tips. I mean, she's got a specific problem with a specific voter constituency.
Bro, of course. I can't believe that people don't acknowledge this. And then also the problem with this little scam that she's pulling is that she was the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually sicked the IRS on people to make sure that they got their tip tax. So like, this is the craziest thing about it. She's for no tax on tips, but was the tie-breaking vote to arm the IRS basically with enough employees to chase down low-income people who may not have been reporting their tips correctly. And now she's all of a sudden for no tax on tips. That tells you that they ran a poll in Nevada and there's something wrong. That's what that tells you, folks. It tells you her support in Clark County is awful or something, and she's got to figure out what to do with it. Maybe she's doing decently in the wealthier suburbs of Reno, but the rest of those who take care of those suburbanites in Reno who would like the no tax on tip policy don't like her at all. And oh, by the way, guess what? There are these groups that consistently poll badly for Trump and poll badly for Republicans in general in the modern era that actually go out and vote for Trump and in much higher rates. And one of them is the white suburbanite. It's like nobody understands this. The New York Times had Joe Biden single digits away from Donald Trump with white voters in 2020. That was coming from educated whites, and it was coming from suburbanites in places like Pennsylvania. Donald Trump won the suburban vote in the state of Pennsylvania. This is such a misnomer. It is a total misnomer. Overall, statewide, he won it by 3 points. I hate to tell everybody. Okay. I mean, this is a load of crap. So if she's polling decently among these groups, and that's what's giving her her so-called lead, and Trump goes out there, not only does what he normally does with these voters, but then also really does improve his margins with Hispanics, with black voters. Because here's the kicker. The history isn't of Donald Trump polling stronger than he performs with non-whites and then doing worse with whites than he polls. The issue is that he does better with whites than he polls, and he did better with non-whites than he polls. You understand? Like, it's both actual real-world scenarios, which is why I played the clip from Enton, because what he's trying to explain to people is these are not small polling misses, and the groups that cause them are they're just super significant. All right. So if you're going to do better with those white Midwest voters than the polls suggest, then Harris cannot afford for him to do any better at all with black voters. She can't. She needs them 95-5, folks. She needs them 98, maybe 2% throw away their vote, third party or something, she cannot lose that. And Democrats have done a good job of keeping the third party non-white vote low. You know, in states like Nevada, I think Robert's right. I think there will be people who throw their vote to Kennedy or none of these candidates or something in these polls, and then will tell us, you know, they'll trigger the signals in the social bias indicators, Rob. You know,
Right.
that's what they'll do.
Yeah.
That's what
Well,
they'll do.
you can overlap with people who say
You
they don't
overlap.
like answering questions, that they're they don't want to be judged based on
I'm
their answer.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yep.
All those, and then you see them showing up voting for Kennedy, right? Then that's telling you, okay, that may be a Trump vote that's parking their vote publicly. So
Yep.
but
Yep.
Arizona, you have the same trends as you have in Nevada and from Maricopa County, other places. I mean,
Yeah, look at that.
Arizona's a state where Republicans typically have had an edge, but they're back
No, it's
restoring that
not.
edge in surprising places. Because the entire Democratic the emerging Democratic majority thesis of 2010, 2012 was all predicated that Mexican American voters, Asian American voters would vote based on their identity rather than based on their cultural values, rather than based on their economic self-interest, and that they would be able to sustain massive margins amongst black voters who a new generation would vote like their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents did.
Yeah.
And we've been pointing out two factors. One, if you've studied immigrant patterns, the communities that come in from immigration don't vote like their grandparents consistently. They start to vote their cultural values and class interest within 2 or 3 generations of being here.
Yep.
And the second, and that was going to be true for the Asian vote and Hispanic vote. And second, if you looked at the black vote, loyalty to one great vote, like abolition of slavery, like the Civil Rights Act, generally lasted only about 3 generations. And once you got into generation 4, generation 5, they started to vote their cultural values. They started to vote their economic self-interest. So, I mean, people forget 1932, a majority of black voters in America still voted for the Republicans, and older black voters overwhelmingly so. But there were cracks in the dam because you were talking about a generation that was 2, 3 generations removed from abolition.
Right.
And now you're having generations that are 2, 3, even 4 generations removed from the Civil Rights Act that LBJ passed, and thus Democratic Party got the credit for it for 60 to 80 to 100 years. But now, it's been so far gone from that. That's where they're getting erosion. And you're seeing it in voter registration data. You're seeing it in party affiliation amongst independent data. You're seeing it in primary turnout data. And that's the data to pay attention to, not the fake polls from Nate Silver and Nate Cohn in the media.
Kamala Harris cited Nate Silver's polling prediction, poll prediction or whatever. I'm like, that isn't even a thing in this industry. What are you talking about? Secondly, if I was Harris, I'd be concerned that Nate Silver has me winning because you are more likely to lose. It doesn't matter if you're
he's the Jim Cramer of politics.
Dude, he is.
He's the reverse
everything, the Super Bowl, everything he predicts, he's wrong. Everything. I mean, he got 08 correct and he got 12 correct. You
still would have made money fading him in certain markets, even in those elections. You've made money fading him ever since. If all you did was bet against what Nate Silver's set odds were, you've made money for a decade. I mean, it's just been profit. I mean, apparently, somebody in the chat said that Ben Shapiro had him on praising him. Ben Shapiro, who, by God, I wish I would have known him in 2012 because I would have robbed him blind.
This is a good. Go ahead, finish.
Remember his big prediction in 2012? Ben Shapiro. Mitt Romney is going to win by over 100 electoral votes.
Yep, 340 something, 340 electoral votes he had. He had him winning by, all right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. 2016, Donald Trump has no chance of prevailing. And this guy's putting on, God bless him, but,
Cernovich is right about him. And
there's other countries Ben Shapiro cares a lot more about than America. It's kind of obvious.
Dude.
He has no connection to the American electorate. He comes from the upper middle class, religious, conservative, professional class tradition. That's not the part, that's not from LA. He has no connection to middle America. It doesn't surprise me as people like Nate Silver on and he's praising him. I've seen other people praise. These people are
But then
terrible.
Robert, let me just say this then, because like for those who have been listening, I was on Quite Frankly last night. Like there is, I mean, you can call it whatever you want, a simulation. I've long called it the construct. There's this wouldn't work. And Rush used to talk about this all the time. The stuff the media does, the poll propaganda, and they're obviously all serving the Democratic Party, which they see as their preferred vehicle for the state, for the administrative state. It would not work without complacent and stupid and cowardly right wingers. Rush always highlighted this and talked about this. You don't know when the drive-by is coming, to use Rush's terminology, or you always fall for the drive-by. You get scared. You're so afraid of them. You're so afraid of the crap they put out. You're underneath the desk, sucking on your thumb in the fetal position like a little coward. That's Ben Shapiro. So not only is Ben not part of the solution, he's actually a part of the problem, because I told people, do not cite Nate Silver when he has Trump up like he had last month. Do not. It's a scam. You're going to fall into it. When he baits and switches on you, you're going to look dumb that you're now criticizing him when you should be criticizing him from the beginning. It is not a model. It's bullshit. And you're falling into the credibility trap that the left has put out. Mark Mitchell is learning it now from Rasmussen. He just got smeared by Newsweek because his polling is supposedly Republican favorable. And he said they didn't even call to ask about, because of who did they cite? They cited Nate Silver's crappy pollster scorecard, and they cited 538 for banning Rasmussen. Now, if you would have read, they'd never called and asked Mark, why were you banned? The emails were outrageous. They were put out publicly for everybody to see. It's because Mark goes on Fox News. It's because Mark goes on Steve Bannon. The same thing with me, with the New York Times, the smear after the 22 election. Did they actually cite my work? They didn't. What did they say? That he's always on feeding Steve Bannon. Him and Steve are friends. That makes my polls not credible. Like, has nothing to do with it. But my point is that the Sean Hannitys, now Ben Shapiro, when you cite them, oh, Nate Silver this, oh, that, you are giving them credibility. And when they turn around and then become part of the scam and the construct and feed the propaganda, and they're really actually not feeding it, they're part of the ones generating it. They're part of the election mafia. Their job is to generate this. You can't then say that they're not credible or they're doing this. All they do, Cernovich is right, dude. All these little bitch ass conservatives do are bitch and moan about how biased the media is. The word's not even bias anymore, you dumb shits. They're totally corrupt and they want your scalp. Don't you understand that? And you're still sitting there crying about them being biased or something. It's not a bias. It's a state-run situation. They don't even know what time it is. They're lost in the sauce, totally lost in the sauce. And they're not even, it's not that they're not part of the solution. It's worse than that. They're actually part of the problem. Cernovich is totally right about all of those, what he calls goobers. The conservative, if it was up to Ben Shapiro, or if all the country had, who's not, all the non-libs in this country had to defend them were the Ben Shapiros of the world, Hillary Clinton would be president and the Supreme Court would be radical left right now. All right. By the way, all of their little pet projects that Donald Trump gave them would never have gotten done. Right? If it was up to them, Mike is totally right about this, Robert. He is 100%. Mike is right about this. If it was up to them, they get no credit for any of the gains that the right has made during the Trump era. In fact, they're part of the problem. The new right gets all the credit. Trump gets all the credit. The people who supported Trump when the traditional right ran for the hills, they get no credit. And you shouldn't listen to them. You shouldn't listen to Mark. You shouldn't listen to Ben. You shouldn't listen to any of them. The only good one is dead. Nobody has replaced him. Nobody ever will replace him. And you better find somewhere else to get your alternative source of information, because they are actually hurting you. And don't bitch and moan about MSNBC. Don't bitch and moan about CNN. They're doing what they're intended to do. They're playing a role that is their job. They're not betraying their own viewership like Ben is, like Fox News is. I find those pieces of shit worse than MSNBC, because at least I know who MSNBC is. And by the way, just Saturday morning, I was told that he didn't like me after I went on his show during 22. And the reason was, yeah, well, he doesn't really like A-type people who are smarter than him.
Yeah, I've never taken Benji Shapiro.
Guy's not serious, bro.
Seriously,
He's
as
not
a political
serious.
analyst. Yeah, he's
And
someone
what did I? Go ahead.
He's someone to not pay too much attention to. But yeah, as we transition to the
They're
Arizona
worse
voter
than
voter
Rachel
registration.
Maddow. Worse.
Yeah, exactly. Just ignore. I get people, like now and then he makes certain kind of points on rhetorical issues by picking on dumb young lefties.
Yeah,
But
that's exactly
limited.
what they told me on Saturday when I was talking to this specific person. They were like, he couldn't have you on because just so people have context. I went on the show on 22 during election night. Somebody who works there, and I'm not going to get into it, but like one of their kids is super close with Trump, and they were like, you got to have this guy on. He's the smartest guy in the business. So it was like kind of a trial run thing. I get on the show, interrupt him and Candace's gush fest over Ron DeSantis, and their like anticipation that it's going to be a giant red wave. And I say, there's some things I'm seeing in Virginia that I don't really like. I don't think they match with what the exit polls are leading you to believe. I'm not sure this is going to be the night you think it is. And oh, by the way, while you take a breath in between sucking on DeSantis's you know what, and I hate to break it to you, but gubernatorial elections have no predictive value for presidential performance. So, like, sorry, if that was the case, your boy Mitt Romney would have won Massachusetts, right? Or he would have been a stronger candidate, but he didn't. Your boy lost, Ben, right? So what happened? He got crushed. He got thumped. He got raked, bro, over the coals in his own state. His own state. It doesn't work. Bradenson was never going to beat her in Tennessee.
He didn't do well in his father's home state of Michigan either.
Nope.
That supposedly the Romney name would carry weight with. But
they remember the old George days.
Yeah, exactly. Who was one of the old Yankee Republicans, another traitor early on, actually, to the conservative cause.
Absolutely, he was. Yeah.
Now so I assume Arizona shows similar data voter registration trends as Nevada.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. We'll say that again. I was too busy calling him a silk stocking. You know what, sucker?
They were the Arizona data. I assume shows similar trends to Nevada.
Here it is. Back in 2020, it looks like Republicans are about to double the advantage voter registration wise that they had in 2020. And interestingly enough, Democrats had made gains leading up to 2020 in Arizona. That was, if you watched What Are the Odds back before the election in 20, Robert and I told you that the voter registration data favored Republicans in all but a few key places. And one of those key places was in Arizona because of Maricopa County. And Democrats were adding voters to the rolls at a very high pace compared to Republicans. And they got, before the election, up to 814,343 active voters, registered voters in Maricopa County. And that is, again, as of November 3rd, 2020. As of July 30th, 2024, that number has fallen from that 814,343 who participated in the general. It is now, as of actives, is 682,927. Oh my God. That's an absolute crater. And Republicans are up a couple. Like, honestly, they're not up huge, Robert, but like Democrats have fallen down. The one thing is, normally independents are the ones who have the lead and have taken lead in Maricopa County. Republicans were not doing as well with them. That number has now shrunk relative to the overall registered voter population, and Republicans have in fact regained as the number one registration in the county. So they went from being R+3 to almost R+6. That's a lot.
Democratic drop-off is very comparable in Maricopa County to Clark County. It tells you it's not something specific to a county, to a state, to local politics.
Yeah.
It's places with similar demographics are seeing similar voter registration trends. And what that predicts is what you're seeing across the country is when you see this scale and size of shift, it suggests things are very favorable for Republicans on party registration, voter affiliation, particularly in states where this has been more predictive, like it has been in Arizona, like it has been in Nevada. And so, in a state he lost by 10,000 votes in 2020,
Yeah.
he now has about a 50,000 vote cushion. That's the
Yeah.
difference. Harris has to win votes that even Biden didn't win.
That's right. That's right. I mean, Robert, Biden had 800, a base of 815,000 roughly. This is just the most, because I got the most recent numbers in Maricopa to be updated. Republicans are 851,227. These are active registered voters, and Democrats are now down to 692,294. In the month of in 1 month, voter registration increased 43,630 from about 2.42 million to 2.46 million. And that's just absolutely huge. And again, that's not being added to the Democratic voter rolls. They're on their way down. They're on their way down.
If there was an honest Democratic surge that the polls are and the polling analysts are trying to tell you there is, you would see it show up in primary turnout and voter registration, and you're not. So it's another indicator the polls are fake. The polls are giving you false information from the media and the universities and the rest.
Yep. Yeah, this guy, Michael, does a good job, the one you sent me. Just that's a good graph to show people. I'm going to give him credit here. Michael Prusier, although I did have to get into it one day with him on Twitter. He didn't seem to understand the difference between voter identification and voter registration. So just so everybody understands, voter registration is more static. People don't change their registration as often as they may change their affiliation.
How they
with
feel.
party. Yeah, how they feel. Right.
And states like Pennsylvania, because your only access to vote in the primaries is to be registered with a party, has much more higher party registration voting data than other places. That there's less independent, unaffiliated voters, not necessarily by party identification, but by voter registration in the state.
Yeah.
But what you're seeing is you're seeing a complete collapse of the Democratic Party in its committed members throughout the state of Pennsylvania.
Dude, look at this. Yeah, look at Pennsylvania. For people who can't see this, let me read them the numbers real quick, because just to look back before Pennsylvania and Arizona, I was right. They lost 182,628 registrations. That's absolutely unbelievable. And most of that came from Maricopa folks. I mean, probably 65%.
We're talking about almost a quarter of their active voter participation, Democrats, is gone. And that also impacts the vote harvesting you can do. Right?
Yeah.
There's fewer places for you to harvest votes.
Yeah.
It's not easy to harvest votes. And, if the apartment complexes only have half the number of people on the rolls, there's only half as many ballots as you can mail in on their behalf.
Dude, 330,000 registrations lost in the state of Pennsylvania. 330,000. And understand, people have been scrubbing. There have been voter rolls that have been scrubbed lately. And by the way, I don't know if someone told me it didn't survive a court challenge. I think they may be wrong. Didn't Pennsylvania now can no longer stop counting once they started, right? That's the new law. I know that was going to be challenged.
Pennsylvania Supreme Court allows them to wait to count mail-in ballots until election night, which in turn delays the count because of how they do it. And Pennsylvania Department of State, the same agency that locked up and illegally imprisoned 2 farm workers that work for the Amish community, is the same Pennsylvania Department of State telling everybody you're not going to have an honest vote count on election night in advance to try to precondition their minds.
Yeah.
But the problem they have is that they've lost massive numbers of Democratic voter registration.
3 times Biden's margin, dude. 3 times Biden's margin, folks. I mean, twice. So I mean, really 2.5, 2.5. That's huge. In some states, we don't have this data, folks, because like Michigan, Wisconsin, Virginia, they don't register by party. And for those of you who are from those states, you know that. But those of you who are not, they don't. So in our, we do what's called inferred modeling, and it basically takes the attributes we know about voters from other things. Could be DMV data, could be home ownership data, could be primary participation data, political party donation data. It's a whole bunch of different stuff, different attributes layered on top of each other and assigned to a single row in a giant database with an API ID. That API ID matches different attributes. Oh, that's that person. He donated to a Democratic cause and participated in 2 Democratic primaries in the last 2 cycles. He's a Democrat, right? So that's how we do it. And it's machine learning. It's now even partly AI. It's sick. It's very accurate. So like states like Wisconsin, we can compare to 2020. It has gotten significantly more Republican, significantly more. And it's like, well, Rich, how did they lose these state Supreme Court seats? That guy ran like hell for MAGA. That guy ran like hell for MAGA. And they haven't, Democrats still have a national base.
And they ran on the corporate ticket. And
yes,
the Democratic candidate ran on the labor plaintiff's ticket. And
simple.
The Pennsylvania is still a populous state. Now, a little tidbit on Pennsylvania.
Wisconsin too. Same thing.
That's exactly what happened in Wisconsin Supreme Court. As the conventionally conservative judges are not popular. Populist conservative judges in judicial elections are popular. Run on a populist conservative platform that's not so anti-worker, that's not so deferential to a government authority. You're gonna win. You're gonna win those votes you need to get over the top. Be Trumpish. Those, for example, in 2022, 2 Senate candidates ran real close to Trump. J.D. Vance, Ron Johnson, as Trumpish candidates.
Yep.
They held the Trump vote. They won the Senate seats. By contrast, Laxalt, by the last month, decided to distance himself from Trump. Blake Masters sort of went his own wacky direction in the last month.
He got beat in the head with millions and millions and millions and millions, but he did,
But, do you really have to say you want to cut Social Security in Arizona with all the retirees? Come on, Blake. God bless. But I don't remember that being part of Peter Thiel's class he took notes on. But Oz, of course, was all over the place. But
he just didn't get the vote out, Oz. Right. If he would have gotten that vote out, he could have squeaked the win out. But
that's like people have asked, what's the difference between 2022 and 2024? No, it's simple. There's a portion of the Trump vote that only votes for Trump. Yeah, they only vote, and this is in the data. Like you look at people who only, when somebody tells you, they only voted in 2016 and 2020, or they skipped 18 and 22. That's a hardcore Trump voter. That the people who showed up just in 2020, some of those are a mix of Democrat votes they got out by hook or by crook. But if they voted only in 20, but there's about 10% of the Trump vote in almost every state that only turns out for Trump, but they do turn out for Trump. So that vote that didn't turn out in 2022 is going to turn out in 2024. And what you're seeing in the voter registration data is that people are disaffiliating from the Democratic Party en masse. And they're doing so in demographics that they need support in. Yeah. And you're seeing the trend, the party affiliation trends, the party association. That's what I'm
saying. Like Gallup's catching this. They're seeing it, Robert. Gallup is finding it. So like registration, folks, is more static. Identification is more fluid. So theoretically, we should see Gallup start to pick up on stuff in identification, and then it should back up the trends that we're seeing later in the registration. That is exactly what has happened. There's just no doubt. I mean, you can clearly see Gallup picked up on it, and the independent stuff is just very, very, very interesting. But I mean, this is R+5, R+5, and it's like, Robert, before I thought there was a response bias favoring Trump somewhat, but still Trump was very clearly going to win. He was going to beat Biden. But like our polls were still coming out like R+2. The highest one was R+4. Even Gallup seems to suggest that the data from Gallup seems to suggest that was at least defendable. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like it was in the world of possibility. It was realistic compared to what we were seeing. What we're seeing now with this response bias that's favoring Harris is not defendable. And Tony Fabrizio has a good point when he brought up, and I'm just trying to tell people before, like recalled vote alone doesn't necessarily say there's a major problem with the poll, but everything else taken with it did. And Tony's point was this, and he made a really good point. He's like, let me just say this. Why when those, because, what was everyone's response to Tony? They said, well, you didn't care when those polls had Trump up. Tony made a really great point that they can't get around, which is those polls were consistent with what we're seeing else, like with all these other indicators. And then also the New York Times poll that had Trump up over Harris by 1. The recalled vote was perfect. It was Biden +4. This recalled vote was crazy. It was 5 points more Biden across those 4 states than it actually was. So the point is, why was the sample generally in line with reality before and now it's not? So you can't say, oh, well, you didn't criticize those pollsters when Trump was up, because those things we're criticizing weren't present in their data sets, right? There was no massive response bias jumping out, even though I argued that there probably was still, but there was no giant recalled vote issues. Sometimes we would find, maybe Biden won a state by 7 and the recalled vote was like 5 or 6, right? Or maybe Biden won the national vote by a little over 4 and the recalled vote was 3.5. We had a poll like that. That's not a big deal. This 4, 5, 6 points, FAU having Trump's vote in the 30s, that's a big problem, bro. I mean, that is a massive, massive problem. Even looking at the Gallup data and the registration data, like it could support a response bias that kind of, not significantly, marginally favored Trump. It still could support that, and you could defend that. You can't defend this. What you're seeing now, you can't.
Completely. The primary turnout data, the voter registration data, the party affiliation data, all shows a dramatically Republican trending election. And that's where you look at underlying information. Look at, has public opinion shifted on their perceptions of the economy? Yeah. Has it shifted on the perceptions of the cost of living? Has it shifted on the accessibility of housing? Yeah. Has it shifted on the perception of immigration? Has it shifted on the perception of war and conflict abroad? And the answer is no, 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 no. And those are the core fundamentals that are driving the incumbent party to extraordinarily low rates of people not wanting to affiliate with them, not wanting to identify with them, not wanting to register with them. And that has translated historically into not voting for them come election day. Now, before I did, there was a good point made in the chat. Kamala Harris is uniquely sensitive to issues related to the service economy because she was part of the service economy, but that was a different part of the Nevada service economy that Harris has some understanding and affiliation and appreciation of. So maybe that's why she didn't favor tax on tips. But if you I dug into the Marquette data from Wisconsin, their past polling, their crosstabs, and past election cycles, including 2020, and their recent polling in 2024.
Presidential.
And dug into New York Times Siena poll in Pennsylvania between 2020 and 2024. And while it was easy to detect the response bias and underlying numbers and reporting, what I was looking for was is there a trend amongst working class whites and younger voters that we're seeing elsewhere? And the answer is, even in their polling data, they have Harris running double digits worse than Biden amongst working class whites and younger voters. And then I was particularly interested, like if I had been Nate Cohn doing that Pennsylvania poll, one of the main areas I would have been curious about is the Lehigh Valley in Northeast Pennsylvania.
Oh my God, of course.
Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, all that region.
Luzerne.
Remember, this is,
Pike.
Joe from Scranton managed to steal, like the votes he stole in the Northeast of the state by pretending to be from there was enough for him to win the state. Had he not improved as much as he did in the Lehigh Valley in the northeastern part of the state, he loses the state.
Absolutely.
He ran better than Hillary in key working class areas in that region.
Yep.
Well, he went from a double-digit edge in the 2020 New York Times poll in Northeast and Lehigh Valley to Harris has a double-digit deficit in that region. So this was something I thought was going to be a problem if Biden was off the ticket, was that just Northeast Pennsylvania would shift back to its 2016 trend line. And given that some of the Mexican-American communities in there that are in the Lehigh Valley swung by 15, 20, 25 points, as even Steve Kornacki has admitted to MSNBC between 2016 and 2020, if he could, the working class white sections he could bring back, Trump could bring back, and he's bringing them back, but he's going to win it by a bigger margin. What you're going to see with Kamala is she's going to underperform Hillary even in working class white areas.
I absolutely think so. With that, I don't understand how you can't see that or you can't think that. And by the way, Hillary was performing better in the polling among those voters than she did in the election. This is like, she was weak in our poll, Robert, but even we overstated our white working class vote in a lot of these states. It was like, Trump was doing worse with educated whites than he did. Hillary was doing better with non-college whites than she did. I mean, so these things iron themselves out. But when you look and you see these kinds of areas in a state like Pennsylvania, that is where Joe had some attitudinal appeal. He was able to pull back some of them. We could even see that in 2020. He was polling better than she was polling. He didn't do as well, even as his poll suggested, but he didn't need to. He just did marginally better, and that was enough. Where is Harris making up the ground in the New York Times poll? By doing extraordinarily well because of response bias in Southwest Pennsylvania and Central Pennsylvania. That is not going to happen. And that's the point I'm trying to make for people. Like, there are some groups that are more, and this is why Trump does better with the polls. There's some groups that are more susceptible to these biases than others. And that never favors Republicans, and definitely not Donald Trump. Definitely not.
Before we get to the wrap up with the super chats, what group in Pennsylvania,
sorry guys,
whose vote total exceeds the margin of victory in 2020 is never included in any Pennsylvania poll?
Oh, the Amish.
Exactly.
The Amish.
I'm always intrigued by that.
Yeah.
That because they're not online, they don't have cell phones, they don't have email. They don't have even the few landlines they have are for business only and only exist in the workplace. So you're talking about 60,000 votes, plus the people who are dependent on the Amish for employment, which is about double that number. So you got about 180, 200,000 people directly impacted by whatever's happening to the Amish economy who aren't showing up at all in any poll. And I think you're going to see that vote trend heavily Republican because of the Democratic Party war on the Amish ever since Shapiro got into the governor's office.
Let me just tell people too that both things can be true, because I saw a lot of comments like, hey, you sound more bullish on Trump today. You've been very critical of him. Both things can be true. I think his campaign is a mess.
There's ways he can dramatically improve. Absolutely. I mean, I guess we should briefly mention, because it comes up often, where people ask me why I don't have confidence in any of the campaign staffs on anybody on the Republican side of the aisle.
Yep.
Or the Republican National Committee. I hear Laura Trump and others say, and I think she believes it, she just doesn't know. There's a reason why people like Chris LaCivita waged war on Paul Dans.
Yep.
Paul Dans is a great Trump advocate.
Yep.
He was trying to build a Trump team
and a
for when
personal
Trump
friend,
got in.
by the way.
And so that's why they waged a war on him in Project 2025.
Yep.
If Laura Trump is serious, if the RNC is serious, if the different campaign committees are serious, if the different campaigns are serious, people like Amanda Milius, you have a Hollywood director who's available potentially to do various things to help you in the creative content world. Yet they don't even reach out to her.
No.
She volunteered and donated years of her life for Trump and worked in the State Department for Trump. The people like that are, and there's a bunch of us in the election law world who nobody in the Republican world has even reached out to help on legal matters related to the election.
Yep.
I hear more from Robert Kennedy's people than I hear from the Republican Party.
Yep.
Which is
that's
ridiculous.
Sad, but ridiculous. Yeah.
And we see on the data side that I've told people if Richard Baris is at the Republican National Committee, I'll have confidence in their data analysis. And here's the truth. So people ask, why is this? It's very simple. The reason why they use outdated mechanisms, and it reminds me of Wag the Dog. Remember when Dustin Hoffman goes crazy because he helps do a brilliant pageant of a fake war to win the election, and instead they give the credit to these idiot political consultants that say, you don't change horses in midstream. The reality is there's an entire grifter class connected in Washington that does fake polling, fake advert. I mean, for example, why would they not be interested in telling people about response bias? Because they want their candidate to believe that they're the reasons their candidate won, not underlying fundamentals, not just handle the tactical aspect. When you have more talent, just be tactically sound. You don't have to be tactically superior even, because they're incompetent at what they do. And they need fake narratives to exaggerate their own skill sets. Yeah. And what they do is they only employ their buddies and pals. Yeah. So if you go to them with an idea for a legal strategy polling strategy, data strategy, voter targeting
Voter
strategy.
registration and
Get out
targeting.
the registration
harvesting.
strategy.
Yep.
Get out the vote strategy. You can be Scott Pressler and be completely ignored for 4 years while you're on the front lines of doing good voter registration activity. Why? Because if hiring Scott Pressler doesn't enrich a whole bunch of people in DC.
Amen. Sound familiar? Book club. We were just talking about this on Sunday. One of the members of the book club is in a very good position to know what we're talking about right now and explain to people that this is 100% true. There's nothing sexy about how, we're approached. Hey, how do we target these voters that you and others have been talking about? Robert, for the first time in our lifetime, the non-voter, the normie, the one that has to get motivated to get out and motivated to be registered, favors Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, by double digits. It has never been the case in my lifetime. All of the low propensity vote, the working class vote, the hard to get out vote has always favored Democrats in my lifetime. And Republicans were always sitting there on the edge of their seat come election day, hoping it wasn't a high turnout, right? Hoping only their high propensity people got out, their educated people got out, their professional class got out. Now that the roles are reversed, they don't have a damn clue on how to get these people out. They have no clue what motivates them. It's, they use the wrong languages, the wrong words, the wrong things to say when they reach out. Their text messages are pathetic. You're not going to cold text these people anyway. You're not going to cold knock them anyway. And when somebody like me says this is how it's got to be done, and oh, by the way, here's a group I think has got a good grasp on it, you should use them, because there's no money to be made there. And it really is just about being a true believer and winning. There's no money to be made. They don't want to do it. And then you have all these people who run too, because there's still, with all the results we just showed you folks in the state, like the Silver State, Nevada, all those results that look promising for Republicans, they are still missing tens of thousands of people. And it would make an election not even close. And the polls would be very, very wrong. Michigan, tons of them. Don Jr.'s, his pet project is always like, I love these hunters. Why don't they vote? I love this group of people. I love this community. I want something that targets them. We try to show them. The grifters come in. And then it's like, oh, but we can do this. And of course, their alternative is going to make them millions of dollars. And they have friends. And the people who surround Trump tell them, those are my friends. And Don Smith always used to say, and he's right, I know a guy. That's what it is. It's an I know a guy environment. I know a guy. It's never who's got the best idea. That is not how it is. It's a grift in the Republican consulting class. And it doesn't matter if it's DeSantis's campaign, it would have been worse. If DeSantis was the nominee, it would have been worse. But the people in the Trump campaign, I'm sorry, are no damn different. I'm sorry.
You got to give the grifters credit. They grifted DeSantis hard. They convinced his wife there that she could measure the drapes in the White House. And, they're ready to go. And they just scanned them left, right, and center. And helped to damage his political career to where he might not have a future. He'd be on the ticket right now if he had to not listen to them. But again, what was their interest? They didn't care whether DeSantis won or lost. They didn't care whether DeSantis had a future or not. They cared about his campaign raising money so they could stick it in their pockets.
Stick it in their pockets. Jeff Rowe, $30 million to run the worst campaign ever. And just to give you guys a great example, a real world example of how these pieces of shit grift. Attorney General Ken Paxton is a great guy and a great supporter of Donald Trump. I personally know him. He's a good dude. All right. And obviously he's a true believer, but he's got the Jeff Rowe shitbags running in his campaign. 2022, I get a call, panicked over from Team Paxton's area. Oh my God, have you polled Texas? I can't believe I'm in a tie with this guy. I'm like, what are you talking about? We just polled the state of Texas. You're up by 9 points. I had to give them the data because why? Jeff Rowe's people wanted to do another fundraising blitz. So they cooked up a fake poll that showed them within 3 points, and they ran around making last minute millions of dollars off of it. And of course, Ken, he doesn't even own his own email list, bro. They own his email list. He has no direction. He has no say in the direction of where they're going. I had to give his friend of like 30 years the poll and tell him, you're getting scammed. So I passed it to his buddy. I was like, tell Ken, this is from me. This is where he really is. You're getting scammed. And worst part about it is, your supporters are getting scammed because you're not the one. It's coming out of your campaign coffers to do this kind of stuff, and they're going to make money off of you too. But you know who they're really scamming, Ken? They're really scamming your voters. They're really scamming your supporters. And if you're cool with that, whatevs, but I'm not. And this is where the race is. You're going to win, and you're going to win easily. And that, I mean, dude, that was like 2 days before the election. They were trying to squeeze a little bit more blood out of the stone. It's just unbelievable. What can people who don't live in key battleground states do to help with on-the-ground get out the vote early and mail-in vote efforts besides donating money? What are the best organizations working on early and mail-in voting? I'm going to say this right now, point blank, that if you are anywhere near the state of Michigan or a family in the state of Michigan, the best group that is doing the work that is actually going to be effective is a group 10x votes, 10xvotes.com. They understand something that none of these grifters do, Robert. This is about personal relationships. And the right doesn't have a big old hole in their heart where God is supposed to be, so they fill it with ideology. And a perfect stranger could knock on a liberal's door and push them to vote and register to vote, get their ballot in. Republicans and conservative people do not behave the same way. It needs to be personal. You need to have so you can go travel through their database, see who doesn't vote in their database, who is eligible, but is either a low prop voter or a no prop voter. And I guarantee you're going to find tons of people who are at work with you, talking shit about Biden every day, making fun of Kamala Harris every day. But when you say, hey, approach him, why didn't you vote? Why don't you vote? There is a level of shaming that has to be done to get these people to vote, but you don't do it from a cold place. You do it from a place of I know you. Robert knows my wife, right? So if he looked up and saw Laura in the database, it's not some schmuck out of nowhere calling. It's going to be Robert who texts saying, hey, I just looked at 10x votes. You don't vote. You better get voting. I'm going to bust your balls, Laura, until you pass that ballot in. That's the kind of work they're doing, and that is the effective work. There's no money in it for Jeff Rowe. There's no money in it for Chris's buddies. So he's not getting, you know what I mean? So they're not getting the tiny little bit they need to expand that everywhere. And sadly, look, I'm not going to say her name, but the Trump campaign in Nevada, it was looking for things like that to do, and it got sidetracked because, again, this one knows a guy. She knows a guy. We're doing this. We're doing that. They want the credit too. They want the money and they want the credit. So, I mean, Robert, what do you tell Gabriel who's not in any of these areas? I mean, honestly, it doesn't stop him from, doing his own work, his own legwork and trying to make sure that people he knows in and around those areas contact their friends, their family, get them out. Doesn't stop him doing that.
We've tried to create that option for candidates and campaigns nationwide. And waited for others to step into the breach. Unfortunately, outside of the one you mentioned, I don't know of any.
We screwed up thinking that but he sucks all the oxygen out of the room, Robert. That's the problem. If you and I would have done this, we would have had to start from the ground up and we would have needed a lot
completely. I mean, what's sad is these should exist. To give an example, how is Kamala Harris stacking her rallies? Well,
let's do this. Yeah.
Well, one, the unions are organizing. So the unions are sending people out to make sure they go to her rallies. The second aspect, though, and there's also student organizations for it.
Yeah.
But the other aspect is they are testing out their micro-targeting. So I got a friend of mine here in Vegas, never been to a political rally, got multiple direct invites to go to the rally.
Yeah.
And some of these people got direct invites from friends on social media saying, hey, this sounds like fun. You want to go to this? Somebody's a Democratic leading voter. Because they want to create the perception of momentum. I mean, I'll give Harris's campaign credit. They understand in ways Biden never did that there's momentum created by the big audiences that Trump has. So they're going to do everything they have to gin it up. Now, Trump obviously doesn't need to send out invites to rallies because he gets too many people anyway. But as an example of micro-targeting, I mean, how did you get that crazy disparity between a 3-point national win on the generic ballot and not winning comparable House seats? Not winning the close Senate seats. It's because the micro-targeting of the Democratic Party is way up here and the Republicans is way down here. And the reason is that even though people have offered to step into the breach to provide high-quality services, there's people in Silicon Valley now offering that because they're terrified at what the Biden administration is doing to crypto and what that means for that portion of Silicon Valley that because of Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance is now aligned with Trump. There's tons of people with the skill set. There's Amanda Milius in the media context in the
Yep.
filmmaking context. There's
They don't
you in the
leverage-
polling and data
They don't
context.
leverage people's skill sets. They don't.
Me and other people in the legal context.
Yep.
The problem is none of us are going to line the pockets of the Jeff Rose of the world.
Yeah.
And so they are not doing anything at scale and micro targeting. You're right, they should be. We've been saying they need to be, and we will support any organization like the one you mentioned in Michigan that's doing it. Unfortunately, beyond the one you mentioned, I don't know of anybody. Now,
Yeah.
people can send me organization. Maybe there's a we don't know about that's doing good work, and we'll promote them here. But the reason they're not getting institutional funding is because the grifters keep a money laundering lock on the campaign funds.
You know what it took for me to make sure that Scott Pressler got a call back? Do you have it? And that's only because of the tie to the new RNC chair. That is what it was unbelievable. He was never going to get a call back if Rona wasn't pushed out by Michael. He was never going to get a call back. It was not going to happen.
Yep.
I mean, and even now, even still, what did that come with? Who conducted the poll for Scott in Pennsylvania?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, they were. You got to hire the schmucks.
You got to hire him. I know a guy.
And that's the problem. And it's got to be something that's broken through.
Scott just paid
hopeful
Tony
that down the
$30,000.
road.
What, 30 grand he paid Tony for that poll to get a 1-2 page memo, bro? And I mean, he sent it to me. What do you think? What do you think? And I'm like, I think it's a 2-page memo from the pollster. Everyone in the media is going to think is the Trump pollster, and no one's going to take it seriously. I mean, and there's like a whole list of things that they targeted. They tested, attack ads against Kamala and everything. And it's like Robert and I are explaining to people what needs to be done here. Forget about AI generated image claims and forget about, this was a Craigslist ad. I mean, look, the fact checkers went to town on that. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. The fact checkers are going to say that it's not. Yes, you can get paid $150 for 3 positive posts about Kamala Harris if you are a social media influencer. I know right-wing influencers who got that message from that firm.
Honestly, it's smart.
It is. Do it your damn self and stop bitching about it.
So Trump had an organic meme army. You use and tap the meme army. But the problem is the people at the top of the money tree don't want to share it with anybody but themselves.
Yep.
And that's the biggest hurdle we still have.
Do you know the damage Brendan Dilley could do with the young vote? Like if he was like really supported. My son got a Dilley meme team meme from one of his gamer friends and passed it to me about Nikki Haley. And he was like, "Oh, Dad, you got to see this." And then it ended with Nikki like bent over and farting. And like they just thought it was the greatest thing in the world. Of course, it absolutely insults and offends the GOP consulting class. So they want nothing to do with it. But that's how you win gamer votes. That's how you win Nevada. I'm living off the grid in Vegas votes. That's how you do that. It doesn't have to come directly from the campaign, but imagine if he was supported just a little bit, Robert, just a little bit,
I mean, there's multiple ways in which all these places can be much more effective. Right now, the problem is controlling the money spigot by the money launderers and the grifters.
Yep. And Mac, you gents think election results are more a product of voter enthusiasm and participation than independent voters moving from one party to another. Absolutely, positively.
Oh, yeah. That's about 75-80% of the election. Yeah. And then it's generally realigning constituencies.
It's even more probably.
That matter more. It's not a group that goes back and forth. Yeah. It's not this, mythical 20% of the electorate that day by day changes their mind. That doesn't exist. Never did. That's what the data has shown for decades. But what it is it's more realigning constituencies.
Yes.
That the entire Democratic realignment was predicated on identity-based politics dominating Asian, African-American, and Latino voters and having a generational edge that lasts as they get older. And both are falling apart for them. So that's
magically holding on to the white working class vote while you do that. Like it's an insane proposition, but at least they admit they're wrong. John Judas and Roy Teixeira.
Roy Teixeira has been great about this. I mean, post over at the Liberal Patriot.
You should read that, guys. If you don't, I don't care if you're not a liberal, you should read it. The Liberal Patriot, Rui Teixeira's Substack is a good thing to read. And by the way, Democrats listen to that man. All right. So if you want to know what he really thinks, which is that the polls are bullshit right now and Kamala's going to get her ass kicked even worse than Hillary Clinton, that's what he thinks right now. Then if you want to know what they're really thinking, I mean, funny thing is, Steve Gruber, I went on his show last Wednesday. We both got Kamala's internal polling. We were looking at it from Michigan. It was Trump +1, dude. In the middle of last week. They're not modeling the electorate the way the New York Times is. Let me tell you that. They are not. I mean, so yeah, I mean, these guys, Mac, that swing vote is like 4 to 7%. It's very, very small. And you could make the case, well, Rich, that could make the election. It could, but what makes it more is who actually does turn out to vote and who you're realigning to what.
And Trump needs new voters to vote. He needs
end of story.
Yeah. I mean, his low propensity vote will vote the traditional one, but he's got a new low propensity vote.
Yes.
And he's got to reach that low propensity vote. And one reason we went through the details of who Kennedy was appealing to and where there's overlap is because there's overlap on that low propensity vote.
They're all over that vote. Exactly.
Really. You know, jump on. Good job jumping on financial freedom because that's also hot with a lot of these younger voters. But now add medical freedom and food freedom, and he's in like Flint.
Yeah, it's a great Stargate 404. And by the way, but I just got to back up what Robert just said. This would be over by 11:30 if he effectively got these people to vote. Like we would all be going to bed early. It's over, and that's it. You know, there's too many of them. And by the way, again, if you just go to 10xvotes.com, you'll see it yourself with your own eyes. The number is astronomical. Ted Cruz was wrong when he said there's like 90 million or some crazy number evangelicals who don't vote. But the premise of what he was saying is actually true. There is a huge number of would-be Republican voters who don't vote. And this is a new thing. Republicans have not been able to grasp it fast enough. And again, like I applaud efforts like the one at Turning Point and stuff like that. I applaud that at least as an effort in theory. It's just, Robert is right. You have to leverage people who have those correct skill sets. Like if you're thinking about election laws or any of this and you don't call Robert and Cleta, you're wrong.
Yeah, Cleta Mitchell.
You're wrong.
Paul Dance. There's some great people in the front lines that are not being called upon that need to be.
Paul got, for his troubles going into Heritage and ferreting out all the disgusting Pence people, for his troubles, he got Chris LaCivita to trash him in the Atlantic. That's what he got for his trouble. And I know Paul, I know his wife. He is a good guy, a great family. They wanted him to run for Congress, and he all of a sudden is a piece of shit. They make fun of him in the Atlantic, Robert. Like, this is disgusting.
That's because he's the real deal. He's the real deal. He's a true Trumper. As he told me when I first met him, he was MAGA before MAGA existed.
He was.
That's who Paul Dans is.
Yeah, man. He was. And he's great because he walks that line. He's living in their world. He's MAGA living in their world. I don't know if he wants me to blow him up, but his wife is like super high society, like, or like, you know, that kind, or could be like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's like one of the most dangerously effective people that Trump could have looking out for him. And what does he get? Trashed in the Atlantic. What does Chris do in response to people legitimately like Mike Cernovich and Raheem Kassem and people from the War Room crew and posse legitimately saying this isn't how you treat loyal people? He gets an image on Twitter of Tony Soprano flipping people off like a childish little baby. Like,
the guy thinks he's a mobster. He'd be taken out by the
way. A guy who wanted Trump thrown in jail after January 6th, by the way. So, you know, I listen, that's not pulling punches. It's not my job to make friends. I don't give two shits about whether they like me or not. I'm telling you the truth. That's my job. That's Robert's job. They can kiss my rosy red Italian ass. I could care less. Crosstabs on the New York Times polls makes no sense. She's -8 with men, plus 93 with Biden 2020 voters, which, by the way, is still twice as many lost to Trump as Trump is losing to her. -3 among 2020 voters, but she is plus 2 to 3 nationally. Yup.
Yeah. That's why you look at the underlying data, and it had more warning signs than positive indicators. If you were a Harris bettor, you would be terrified by these numbers. Some people have asked me, what if you were a Harris bettor, wanted to bet Harris, what do you want to see after the Democratic National Convention at some point in August? I want to see double-digit leads. I want to see double-digit leads out of the Midwest. I want to see double-digit leads out of the Southwest. I want to see double-digit leads nationally. I want to hit those numbers that Hillary and Biden hit, and Hillary barely lost, Biden barely won.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I want at least what they got. And if I can't get, I mean, not only that, this is going to be the biggest honeymoon period in the history of American presidential politics.
You might not catch
this. Is somebody who has never been hit at. Everybody else who even got a hagiographic coverage by the press had 6 months of getting hammered within the party by their party opponent in the primaries.
Yeah.
Barack Obama had a nasty extended race with Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had a nasty extended race with Bernie Sanders. Kamala had none of that. And she's getting the hagiographic coverage both of them got in the summer of 2016 and 2020.
And only getting numbers. And getting worse numbers than they did.
Exactly. Substantially worse numbers.
Yep.
Substantially worse.
As Harry
if I'm a Harris gambler, I'm terrified of what numbers I'm seeing.
As Harry Enton just pointed out in that clip that we played before. And that's another thing about tapping people with skills. Why is Tulsi Gabbard not at a Trump rally yet? Like, Tulsi Gabbard literally ended Kamala Harris's career. Her presidential aspirations were dead the minute she stepped next to to Tulsi Gabbard.
Well, and immediately after that debate is when she's suddenly put on the terror watch list.
Yep.
So, I mean, it gives you an idea of who was behind Harris's campaign.
Yep. Exactly. But Rich, if you have too many on the ballot, you'll end up with butterfly ballots.
No, the butterfly ballot was a design issue, not a candidate choice.
Yeah,
they might have been being sarcastic.
That's a common media thing. You hear democracy, but what they're actually saying is democracy. Yeah, I get you. I smell what you're cooking. Absolutely.
I mean, they just anointed their candidate. For the first time in the history of the primary era, they just anointed somebody.
We're going backwards, Robert. We're regressing, man. We're regressing. They did. They just you picked. We don't like your choice, so we're gonna. And the scary thing.
Even Hubert Humphrey had run in primaries before.
The scary thing is that basically every Democrat's like, okay, I mean, they're just total drones. It's really scary.
And they're being told, get in line, or you're a racist, sexist, homophobe, whatever.
Yeah. Seeing as there are some R-friendly groups that don't register to vote, i.e. evangelicals, would it be wise to push for automatic voter registration?
This is what's so ironic. Now, this is what's hurting Democrats.
Pennsylvania?
We can wrap up on this because I was trying to figure out.
New Jersey?
Well, I was about to project how many people I think are going to vote. And so I went and looked at a bunch of people's expectations and estimations. And what I came across during that was a bunch of Democratic consultants complaining that high turnout was a problem.
Yep.
That they should probably not try to gin up turnout blindly.
Yep.
That they should not try to blindly register people.
As
the Biden administration could help itself and send everybody out to register everybody, but you dig into the data, the marginal voter, the low propensity voter, leans Trump by double digits in all the data. Even the polls that say Hillary has Harris up, still the new voters and the non-voters say Trump.
Yep.
In fact, how they get to some of these polls that show you're seeing Trump do better in registered voter polls than likely voter polls.
Yep.
For this reason. Democrats are sort of panicky about what they're supposed to do. It's also going to skewer their ballot harvesting operation. That you got to make sure you fill out that ballot yourself. You can't trust grandma.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, there's some things that they were doing in 18 and 20 or 20 and 22 that I'm not sure that it's safe for them to do anymore. And that is hiring.
It's clearly not. I mean, because there was some legitimate ballot harvesting, putting that legitimate in quotes. And what I mean is it was actually the person's vote, but they just wouldn't have otherwise voted, but for the person making the effort to get them the ballot, make sure the ballot got returned, etc. The problem is that part of the ballot harvesting, they can't trust. The legal, semi-legal, because ballot harvesting is illegal in a bunch of states, but the semi-legal part of that, they can't trust because it's those demographics of especially it's the low propensity young black male voter, the low propensity young Hispanic male voter, the low propensity young Asian woman voter that is the one trending so heavy towards Trump.
Yeah.
So you can't trust that vote anymore.
That hilarious interview. Hilarious interview. There's a Hispanic population in Pennsylvania, obviously, outside of Allegheny County, and Fox News goes in there. These are typical low propensity, I don't always vote voters. Those who voted for, because they did vote in 20 for the first time in a while, and most of them Fox had spoken with, obviously were Biden voters. They were all for Trump now, all. And they're like, but what about Kamala Harris? And they were just like, what about her? Who cares? Same thing, like that's it. That is the vote that they were safely able to go and harvest in 2020, which Shapiro said, don't worry, Allegheny's going to find the votes that Biden needs. Remember, that was the vote that was safe to do. But now you got to make sure before that goes in the envelope, you know what that bubble is filled in with. Because if you don't, and you just go out and harvest those ladies, and you go out and harvest those guys outside the barbershop, you're screwed. That's going to be a Trump vote, and they know it. So good luck with that.
And you see it in their projections of total votes.
Wow, it's 4
Democratic data consultants are basically wanting a 20 million vote drop off. They want about 140 million, is they're saying the target number to vote in 2024. That's 20 million less, give or take, than 2020. Yet voter registration rolls have increased 5% in that time frame. So, or voting eligible population has. And so I was like, oh, so they're wanting turnout to be down. Now my instinct is, you look at the enthusiasm numbers, excitement numbers, paying close attention numbers, all those suggest that we will have a slight drop off from 2020. And then I think the unavailability of the ease of mass mail-in voting will drop off some votes as well. And then I think the Democratic fear that maximum turnout hurts them will likely lead to a further decline of their targeted efforts. So I think maybe we get 150 million vote in 2024.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that's the thing. I mean, like, Trump could blow this thing wide open, because there's all and by the way, I didn't play that clip of Harry. I was showing I have it. I just didn't put it up, but he was talking about potential turnout based on the data, and so Democrats had popped right back to where they were in 2020. Republicans have kind of been right below it the whole time. But now they've dropped down again, because voting certainty does not, like, the enthusiasm. I did play that part of the clip, didn't I? The voting enthusiasm does not translate into voter certainty all the time, especially on the Democratic side. It's just the way it is. Republicans a little bit different, but that is potentially bad for her, because when you're talking about a poll that's within the sampling era, and there's like, oh, well, Trump voters going to get these high propensity and low, they're going to get a chunk of low propensity that comes out. And if Democrats don't, then he could erase that. That's why I'm saying, though, like, with the efforts Robert and I were talking about, like, if they did that and did it effectively, and they still have time to do it, they're running out of it, but they still have time to do it, then it could significantly overwhelm them everywhere. And they could take 2-3 days, Robert, trying to count these late arriving absentee ballots, but because of what we were just talking about with the voter registration numbers, they wouldn't have enough. And this is what people, like, they have this false idea in their head that there is an infinite amount of ballots that they could just stuff through the machine over the course of 3 or 4 days. That's not true. There's a finite amount of ballots, and if Republicans go out and get those people, there's nowhere near enough of them. Nowhere near. Last thing, and then I'll end. It's 4:30. We are way over, but this is an interesting one. Jonathan, you should watch Inside the Numbers tomorrow, because I'm actually going to get in more on electoral vote ceilings and floors. But what do you think about this last thing here, Robert? He says, what do you think about if Trump wins, the Democrats don't allow him to become president in January? Would they succeed? We've heard Jamie Raskin already make public statements about how the House, it's important Democrats win the House, because we need to make sure that Trump doesn't, take the presidency. But that doesn't even matter, does it? Because the old Congress is the one, isn't it? Who I know. Is it the new?
Well, it'd be the new Congress that makes the final vote.
Okay. But they're just certifying, all right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
they
problem,
still need to. Yeah.
I mean, the problem is they have 3 problems. One, they're not likely to be in the majority. So they're not going to have the votes to do it anyway, even if they wanted to. Second, it is going to be very hard, after they spent 4 years saying that challenging certification is a federal crime for which you belong in prison for life, to turn around and do it themselves.
Yeah.
I understand that people like Democrats are notoriously hypocritical, but they've kind of let the ship sail on that, being able to do so with any degree of credibility.
Yeah.
And
My
third,
God.
the biggest hurdle there is just politically. Does the Democratic Party want to block the person that was elected president from the presidency officially? I mean, because no one's ever tried to do that in this way, and the political blowback could be so massive
So
that
that's
the
what I'm
Democratic
thinking.
Party would not exist in 4 years.
That's what I'm thinking about. Like, I don't put anything past the Democrats anymore. I mean, legally speaking, it was a Herculean task to remove Joe Biden. I always told people, though, that if they are, it's not going to be for Michelle Obama, or this one and that one. The donors are not going to allow them to just forget about that $300 million that was sitting there in that fund. And she keeps claiming she raised all that money. She has raised a lot of money, but that figure includes the amount that she assumed from Joe Biden when they changed the FEC filing, the damn committee name. Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, oh, I raised this too. No, you didn't. But okay. But yeah, I mean, after they did that, the political fallout would be that they are erasing the votes of almost 15 million of their voters. They didn't give a shit about it. And their voters apparently don't seem to care either. So it's like but this is different, because this would be dealing with the entire electorate, not just your own party. This is different. And that is like, oh man, Robert.
It would be staging a coup
bad.
on a different scale.
That's
And
a coup. Yeah.
I just don't think
Real
I don't think they'll be in a position to do it. Constitutionally, they're not entitled to do it. It might get reversed by the Supreme Court anyway. But the third is, I don't think they have enough political will that's unanimous amongst Democrats to do it. There'll be at least some portion of them. They'll be like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
So that's where I don't think it's going to. I think it's a risk, but I think it's 5% or less.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly,
that's probably
there's still a greater risk they try to take Trump out by other means, sadly.
Oh man. These people are just so, yeah. I honestly think that Robert's right. They have other things to try first, and that would be to take another shot at him. Let's just get real. All right, because now we're finding out the worst. I told you guys we were going to find out the worst when it came to this assassination attempt. This woman is not only incompetent, she's a Trump hater. There's no reason she should have ever have been in charge. I don't know how the hell that building, which is, by the way, is just so happens to be the exact distance away, 150 meters, where iron sights are for that firearm. I mean, this guy have no renown, no success, no story, no nothing. He had no credentials, just happened to find the only place that Secret Service wasn't going to be. They did this, dude. This was intentional. And more people keep digging, which they should, the more they're going to find out. They tried to whack this guy, and the timing, Robert. I watched your thing on Locals about this, and I was listening to you, and it's like, I don't know how people don't see it. I don't know how people don't see the timing was absolutely perfect. It was like right before the convention, which, by the way, seems to indicate that there are Republicans who are okay with this. You know what I mean? Like, absolutely. And let's not forget, Nikki Haley's endorsement came when? All right. I mean, her buddies at Bowen have been knocking people off left and right, in case you haven't been paying attention. If you think he killed himself, you're out of your mind. They killed him because he was going to give that testimony, that whistleblower testimony. I mean, what planet do these people live in? Everyone's so naive, Robert. Everyone's so naive. It reminds me of the scene from The Godfather. Now who's being naive, Kate? Right? Like, what the hell do you think they do in this country? You think they're any different? They're not. People with power like it, and they do horrible things to keep it. And it's tell people where to go, Robert. It's right up there on the screen, but tell people where to go, what to check out.
So the free bet recommendation for today's show is bet Trump to win Nevada. If he is anywhere at 65% or less. So he should be a 2-1 favorite, not a 2-1 underdog in Nevada, based on the data we reviewed in today's show. So that's the free pick. I got about 50 other recommended picks in all the political betting markets available: Polymarket, Predictit, other places across the world at sportspicks.locals.com. That's where you can find all of those. And remind everybody about the public polling project if they want honest data through the rest of the elections.
I always forget myself, man. I always do. I've been doing a better job, but I mean, you're better advocating for it than I am. But yeah, please, thank you. Go check out Robert's Locals page, man. It's really cool stuff over there. I don't know how you keep up with all that. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It is, but he does it well, folks. You can follow me right there on Locals, peoplespundit.locals.com. You'll see a little hand waving, support our polls. That's where you can learn more about the public polling project. Keep it coming, keep it coming. I want to poll a lot because, like we were talking about earlier, especially it's time to add these social bias indicators, and the more we have them, the better. It's that simple. But yeah, Robert, thanks, man. As always, I'll see you next week, brother.
Will do.
All the best, folks. Follow Robert on Locals. Follow me. I'm going to kick rocks here. Inside the Numbers is tomorrow, but don't forget, Laura and I are going to a wedding this weekend, so the schedule is going to be screwy after Wednesday. We're probably going to do Fridays Inside the Numbers on Thursday. All right? So don't forget. Also, our friends at freedomgoldusa.com. Let me give them a quick shout out real quick. The links are in the description. They have an incredible deal. I meant to bring this up to Robert so he could tell you about it, how good this is. But, all of these companies have their minimum commitments. Freedom Gold USA for us dropped it down to just $500, and you get put into a prize pool. Somebody's going to win some free silver, which is really cool. Go to the website, freedomgoldusa.com/rich, which is down in the description, or you could just call them, give them a buzz, and don't forget to let them know that the People's Pundit sent you, because then they're going to give you all those cool extra deals. All right. No hard sell, folks. No pressure. Different with Brian and his boys over there. All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow. All right. Thanks for watching, and nice viewership, folks. See you tomorrow. Noon Eastern Standard Time. Right? Right? Yeah. Noon. Had to make sure there.